Okay. We're good to go, Alexander. How are you doing?
I'm doing extremely well. Very, very busy week with international news. Obviously, an extraordinary battle of wills going on between the Americans and the Russians, in which the Russians, for the moment, are wiping the floor, by the way. And we'll talk about that in a moment or later. But the other big news today is that Putin and Xi Jinping have had their meeting. I've been going through the readouts. We've got readouts from the Chinese, very, very detailed readout of the talks. We've had a brief publication by the Russians of the introductory statements. We've also got more information pouring out from both foreign ministries. And we've also got a joint statement that the two governments have published. So it's all looking extremely interesting. There's also been a meeting between the Chinese and Russian foreign ministers, Wang Yi and Lavrov. So a lot going on there. And immediate take, Russia is pivoting east. Now, the days of Russian gas being pumped west are slowly ending. In fact, it's looking increasingly as if Russia is fully committing itself to becoming China's big gas supplier. And the Chinese obviously are taking reciprocal action. And lots more coming, I'm sure. We've got lots of information still pouring out from Beijing. But I haven't been able to get on top of it because obviously we're still waiting for translations. And all of this going on at the same time as there's this extraordinary negotiation going on between the United States and Russia. And it's now clear that it is a negotiation purely between the United States and Russia on security guarantees. And this is a topic I am very keen to discuss with an American lawyer, with Robert Barnes specifically, because to be straightforward, it looks to me, it is uncannily like an exercise in litigation. We have each legal team putting their points to each other in what you might call pleadings. And now we're into the state of what you might call interrogatories, with the Russians probing the weak points in the American position. And the American written replies, which I analyzed last night, are riddled with weak points. So it's clear that we're looking at some kind of a very tough negotiation there. Of course, we mustn't go too far in our legal analogies because this isn't going to end up in a courtroom. But the fact that, as I said, the Russians are wiping the floor with the Americans on the arguments is a sign of who has the diplomatic and political initiative. And so a lot going on that front. And at the same time, we have Macron and Schultz, the Tweedledum and Tweedledee of European politics. They're heading to Moscow, one after the other. And to add to everything, we now have the deepening economic crisis in the West. And it is a very severely deepening economic crisis. We have interest rates rises in Britain. We've had talk about cost of living crisis, biggest cost of living crisis in 30 years. In other words, since the end of the Cold War. We have a confirmation that fuel prices are going to enormously surge in London in April, in Britain in April. The same is happening across Europe. And of course, all this is happening in Britain, together with a political crisis in which Boris Johnson's premiership looks to be now in a very advanced state of disintegration. It was an extraordinary affair there in Britain because he had this get out of jail card from Sue Gray this Monday, and he shredded it. He tore it up with a disastrous speech on Monday, and he's now paying the price.
All right. Welcome, everybody, from Locals, our Locals chat. Welcome to everybody there. Yeah. And from Brian at Locals says, just in, NATO Chief Stoltenberg to become Norway's next central bank governor. So Stoltenberg has gotten promoted to a very cushy job Job well done, Stoltenberg.
Absolutely.
What the globalists are saying.
Absolutely. Fail and you get promoted.
Yeah.
That's the way
fail
it's
and you
done.
get promoted up. It's going to be a very easy job for him.
Yeah,
He's going to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's what you get when you promote war, like Stoltenberg has done.
Yeah.
Russia and China signed major energy deal. 30-year agreement will boost gas supplies by 10 billion cubic meters and will be settled in euros. I think that's the key line there. Will be settled in euros. Alan Watson is moderating in the YouTube live stream, as is Reckless Abandon. And welcome everybody from YouTube as well. Thank you for joining us. Hello to everyone in Australia, everybody from Hungary and Wales, the UK and Bangkok and New Mexico is in the house, in Kansas City and Massachusetts and Italy and Bucharest. And Toronto and everybody in Canada. Go Truckers. Go Truckers. And Nigeria, Belgrade, Serbia. Germany is in the house as well. And Ireland is in the house. Alexander and just a lot of countries, a lot of people from a lot of countries. Minsk, Belarus, Indonesia, Florida, Indiana, and Egypt. Austin, Texas.
Wow. Welcome to
Lebanon,
all of you.
Amsterdam, Portugal, Bosnia, Amman, Jordan, Colombia. Yeah. Incredible. We had a lot of stuff with Latin America and Russia as well. You had Argentina, the Argentina president was visiting,
absolutely Moscow.
Visiting Putin as well. Big news there. But okay, let's
the Americans trying to prevent it, by the way, which is a crazy idea because Argentina is friends with Russia. At least the new present government is. So that was a crazy idea. And Bolsonaro, of course, is off to Moscow as well. So it's interesting that you see the Russians talk both to the left-wing leaders in Latin America and to the right-wing leaders. They talk to everybody. Everybody is going to Moscow. This isolated country with the economy the size of, is it, the Galapagos Islands? I can't remember. Guadeloupe, maybe.
A country masquerading as a gas station.
Gas station. I saw a senator actually repeat that comment.
Well,
it's become a trope now, and so bad, so stupid, actually.
And from Russia. They're seeing us in South Africa, Cape Town. Hello to everyone in Moscow and Vermont and Bahamas, NYC. Awesome. Great to have everybody with us. Hey Man says in a super chat, one game is often the most difficult game to win. America can never be underestimated. Always one festival away from a comeback. We essentially have 9 lives diplomatically and never-ending credit. Thank you, Hey Man. And Hey Man also said in a super chat after you were talking about Russia moving east, he sent out, Russia can extract huge concessions from all sides.
Of course he can. Can I just, a very, very good point. Hey Man, I agree with every point that you've made except one. America cannot get unlimited credit. That is a dangerous fallacy. And at the moment America understands that, then all the other things that you said will come true. At that point, America will bounce back. When it stops living on this idea that it can get unlimited credit and starts focusing on itself, on its productive capacities, which are huge, on the entrepreneurial energies of its people, then it will transform.
America first.
America first, exactly. And just to say, you'll see that I'm wearing another sweatshirt, and of course the American flag is there.
That's right. That is a new sweatshirt with the American flag. And Freedom Autopsy Report said Joe Biden went woke and America has gone broke.
Yeah.
It's from Freedom. Biden has really lurched very, very woke left. I mean, I don't even think it's left right anymore. He's just gone full left. So
to a degree, nobody imagined. But of course, it's not Biden, really. He's got all these things written for him.
That's what they're advising him.
He spouts out whatever is put in front of him. Mind you, he's always done that. It's not that different from what he's done. I mean, when he was in the early 70s, early 80s, when he started his career, he was, with friends with segregationists.
He plagiarized British politicians.
Neil Kinnock, and that's a farcical one because, of course, Kinnock lost An unsuccessful British politician. So quite why you want to copy failure as opposed to copy success, I really can't understand. But anyway, he did it.
Fin Freak says greatest potato ever.
Quite, yes.
Yeah. So everybody on your way in, hit that
Yeah.
like button as well. And Alexander, let's jump into it because we have a lot to talk about. And the title of this live stream is "The Emperor Has No Clothes."
Yeah.
And I believe that's Hans Christian Andersen. I believe that's a book.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is. It's Hans Christian Andersen.
Yeah, and I think this fits three leaders at this very moment, and it's all kind of related. You know, the Emperor has no clothes.
No clothes.
Who do you want to talk about, Alexander? Of the three, first we could talk about Justin Trudeau, and you know, he could have tried to speak with the truckers. He could have tried to diffuse the situation. He could have met with them. He could have heard what they had to say. He could have tried to resolve the issues. Instead, he fell back on everybody at the protests. They're bad people. They're white you-know-whats, and they're the R word. And he's doubled down on that. Actually, he sent a tweet yesterday doubling down on that claim. And it is not winning him friends at all. And so the Emperor has no clothes. When we all look at Justin Trudeau today, we understand that he is nothing more than a puppet who is scripted and is being told what to say. And boy, is he being scripted very, very poorly. He's still in hiding, by the way. We can talk about Boris Johnson, who for the past month has had this Sue Gray Partygate scandal report hanging over his head. The report was a complete dud. It was a way out, actually. She gifted him a way out of the scandal. And what does Boris do? He walks into Parliament and he gives a very bizarre, terrible speech in front of the entire world. And he makes just claims that you just don't even need to make, whether they're true or false. You just don't even need to say them. And he ends up now having, I believe now the count is 4 or 5 conservative MPs who say, I'm done with Boris. I have no confidence in him anymore. What an own goal Boris scored on himself. Boris Johnson is an emperor who has no clothes. And of course, we can look at the ice cream eating potato head Biden, who has turned the U.S. policy, the U.S. foreign policy, into an absolute joke. Ned Price from the U.S. State Department gave this bizarre statement yesterday, and Matt Lee completely called him out on it. Ned Price is now saying that Russia, the U.S. State Department, is confident that Russia is planning a false flag using child actors in Ukraine in order to justify an invasion of Ukraine. And Matt Lee was like, this is ridiculous. Where's your evidence? And what was Ned Price's response? Well, I'm telling you this. That's our evidence.
Yes, I know.
The evidence is I'm telling you this. And Matt Lee was just, I mean, he just took him to town. It was an absolute complete embarrassment. By the way, you also have Liz Truss, the foreign secretary, the foreign minister in the UK, confusing the Baltic Sea with the Black Sea. You have Jen Psaki saying that the invasion is not imminent anymore. The Biden White House is doubling down on this fiction with the Russian invasion, while the rest of the world is saying, this is ridiculous. Let's move on. We don't want to hear it anymore. But the Biden White House, along with the UK, is continuing with this story. So which emperor do you want to discuss first? Let's hit all three, Alexander. Well, real quick, and then we'll get to questions from locals and super chats, and we'll unpack these three clowns.
Well, let's start with Justin Trudeau, and I want to talk about him first because, in a way, I'd like to get him out of the way first because he always arouses exceptionally strong emotions in me, and we've seen why. I mean, what has happened over the last couple of days is that the mask, such as it was, has now well and truly fallen. He's shown himself to be, and I'm going to say it straightforwardly, a coward. He hides. He's got protests. He hides somewhere where nobody knows quite where it is. He uses the coof as his excuse for hiding. I'm not even sure I believe that, by the way. I mean, I really don't. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only person who is skeptical that this has suddenly come on so conveniently. But all right, I may be going too far there. But anyway, that's it's not surprising if I would be skeptical. And he then says things about Canadians which show, frankly, that he is an extremely nasty, unpleasant, horrible man. I mean, this is not, the genial, good-natured, tolerant, kindly figure that he's pretended to be in so many places.
He's
Now,
a terrible person.
he's a
He's a
terrible
terrible
person.
person.
Terrible person. A person who talks like this is a terrible person. Now, we've found out already, because of all these other scandals, that he's corrupt. Again, I say that straightforwardly. We know
How many scandals have we documented? There's the
no.
scandal. There's the
Yeah.
there was that company in oh my God. People in the chat help me out. I know that we've done videos on three scandals that he's been involved in.
Exactly. So he's corrupt, he's cowardly, and he's horrible. What redeeming features does he have? Absolutely none. Now, I didn't know every detail about this, but it's not difficult to sense it.
SNC Lavalin.
That's
sorry.
right.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm looking at the chat. SNC Lavalin.
And perhaps it's unsurprising, therefore, that he provokes strong reactions, including from me. And I'm far from being the I'm a sort of amiable sort of person in most things. I mean, you'll know how polite I am about people, but he is, can I say it straightforwardly, a con man of the most unpleasant type, and a really ugly one. Now, I'm not going. I could use much stronger language, but I think everybody understands how I feel. Now, I think what's happened is that Canadians have now seen this, because what he's done at a time of an economic crisis, a cost of living crisis, at a time when people are finding it increasingly difficult to maintain their income. And, Canada's a very rich country, but having said that, everybody is suffering as a result of the inflation, which is present in Canada as it is everywhere else. What has happened is people have come out, they protested with good cause and with justifiable reason. You might not agree with them, but you can address them. You can come out and explain your policy to them. You can recognize that people are going through a hard time. And what does he do? He insults them, and he insults them in an incredibly abusive way, without, of course, having any reason or cause to. The fact that some people don't want to observe his regulations doesn't mean that they are all the other things that he is saying they are. That is what lawyers call a non sequitur. And it isn't just a non sequitur. It is a grotesque, hideous smear, one he is doubling down on. And it shows the kind of human being that he is. Now, as I said, I could speak more strongly. I'm not going to, because this is a program. Even if YouTube weren't censoring me in a public program, I would not use some of the language I might use privately. But I think everybody can understand how strong my feelings about this are. And by the way, as I said, I've always disliked him. But now he's shown why, what the reason is. I haven't felt, let me put it like this, I haven't felt so strongly about a politician since Blair was Prime Minister. And that is how strongly I feel. Mm-hmm.
And you know what's going to happen with Trudeau when he's finally long gone? He's going to follow the exact road of Tony Blair.
Yeah.
Put money on it that he's going to become this consultant. He's going to start making all kinds of bank by selling all kinds of despicable and terrible things to countries. And that's going to be his path.
That's exactly
he tried. He got the Ottawa City Council and the Trudeau government actually went to petition GoFundMe to cut off the funds
Yes.
of the trucker for a second time.
Yes.
This is how bad this guy is.
Absolutely.
I mean,
I mean,
it blows my mind that
no, it blows my mind. I mean, it's
yeah.
absolutely terrible. I have to say, I mean, bad as the Democrats in America are, I mean, they're not as ugly as this. This is really ugly. I mean, it's revolting, actually. And as I said, I could use stronger language. Of course, where he goes, the Democrats in America follow, and of course, they're like this. I mean, they're really tied up together. So, maybe I shouldn't be too hasty to say that he's worse than they are. But I mean, whatever they are, rather, he is terrible. I mean, he's a terrible human being.
No, I think we've definitely seen what a despicable leader looks like. That's what this entire protest has shown.
Absolutely.
One of the big things that it's shown is that this man is just, he's not naive. He's not, yes, he's a puppet, but he's not an innocent puppet.
No.
He's, I don't even know if he's an ideologue, to be quite honest. I don't even know if he believes in the ideology that he's talking about. I just think he's a bad guy.
No,
he's not a good person.
I agree with that. Now, I mean, what he is what you might call a fellow traveler, a passenger on the globalist ship. He's in it because, of course, he knows it works well for him. I mean, we've talked about other people. Let's talk about Stoltenberg. Stoltenberg is a true believer. I mean, he really is. I mean, it obviously benefits him to be a true believer, but I mean, I think he is genuine about the kind of lunatic things he says. Trudeau, frankly, I think he's just in it for himself.
Yeah. Who do you want to talk about now?
Well, let's
Boris
talk. Let's go from the ridiculous to not the sublime exactly, but at least the important. Now, Boris is another thing again, because I mean, it's difficult to know where to start with Boris, because this is in a much more substantial figure in some ways than Trudeau is. I mean, he's somebody with genuine political skills. That may sound surprising to say, given what a shambolic and clownish figure he is. But deep, if you really drill down, there is actually an intelligent man far below the surface. But as I've said many times, if you play the clown all your life, and Boris has been doing that ever since he was at school in Eton, if you play the clown all your life, eventually you become one. And the moment finally comes when people tire of your act, because when they want a prime minister, they want a serious person there. And that's exactly where we've reached now. The Conservative Party, which he led to victory in 2019, the Conservative Party, which he consolidated in power, the people who voted Leave, if you like, the Leave, the Brexit community in Britain, to whom he delivered Brexit, they have just had enough, because he is just becoming just too ridiculous and too shambolic. Now, what is bringing him down is a non-crisis. All right, he broke all the rules during the lockdowns. That is extremely bad. That's made people extremely angry. But it's not something which affects people in the most direct way. I mean, they're angry because obviously many people observe these rules. Many people suffered by observing these rules. It makes them very angry that the Prime Minister is not observing the rules that he imposed on all of the rest of the country. But in a sense, it's not something, this Partygate scandal, which is directly affecting people in their homes, in their jobs, in their lives. But he has mismanaged it so grotesquely. And then on Monday, he was given this report by the civil servant, which, to be absolutely straightforward about it, Alex calls it a dud. It's both a dud and a whitewash. It gave him the absolute get out of jail card. It actually endorsed the idea that these parties in the garden at Downing Street were work events. I mean, it actually says that, which is bizarre, actually, but that's what it says. It makes this ludicrous point about, excessive alcohol consumption when you're working isn't, a good idea. Well, as if alcohol consumption when you're running the country is a good idea. I mean, it was a farcical, a dreadful document. But he could have gone to the House of Commons. He could have apologized. He could have said that lessons have been learned. He could have said that this was a terrible thing. He could have said that he takes personal responsibility. He could have said that he will cooperate fully with the Metropolitan Police in their investigation. He could have said that he's asked Sue Gray for a follow-up report when that investigation is concluded. And he could have said that the right thing to do is to wait until these two reports come, the full report from Sue Gray, the full report from the Metropolitan Police. And at that point, he will come back to the House of Commons and he will address the nation and he will take responsibility. And we all need to wait until that point comes, because there is now a serious investigation with which he is cooperating underway. If he had done that, he would have been safe, because once those investigations reported in 6 months, a year's time, who knows when, maybe in high summer when everybody's on holiday, by that point, politics, as they say, is a week in politics is a long time. By that point, people would have moved on. And if Boris had shown that he was an effective prime minister, back in charge, done various things in the country which people would have been impressed by, well, they would have said, well, so much for that. It was all very bad. He behaved appallingly over Partygate, but let's put it aside, because he's still the prime minister. He's still the person who delivered Brexit. He's still the person who took us out of the European Union. He's still the prime minister who won that big majority. He's closer to me than the Labour Party is. And for all the mistakes that he's made, well, we'll put them aside and we'll continue to back him. Instead of doing that, he comes up with this ludicrous, embarrassing, arrogant speech in which he shows no real sign of contrition. His apology persuades no one. It comes across completely insincere. And he launches this attack on Keir Starmer, a failing opposition leader, on the handling of the Jimmy Savile affair. For those who don't know, this is a notorious paedophile who was involved in all kinds of media activities and who managed to survive for years in full public view. And he was investigated and reinvestigated and let off, and was able to continue doing what he was doing. Well, maybe Keir Starmer has questions to answer about that, about the fact that he was director of the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, when some of these things were going on. But this was absolutely not the time to bring this up. And the result was that it looked like Johnson was evading responsibility, smearing Starmer, because that's how it came across. And he made Starmer look dignified and impressive, which up to this point in time, Starmer has never really looked. And of course, we now have massive ructions. We see the staff at Downing Street. Many of them are resigning and walking out in disgust. And we see lots of, some Tory MPs, especially, note this, Tory MPs from the shires, from the heartland of the Conservative Party, they're coming along, and they're saying, we have no more confidence in this. We simply can't put up with this anymore. People will accept a great deal. They will accept prime ministers who make mistakes, prime ministers who fail, prime ministers who do things wrong. But they will not accept a prime minister who is fundamentally clownish and frivolous. It makes a governing party feel ridiculous, and that is something that people simply can't forgive. So I have to say, if he survives now, he will be, frankly, the Houdini of politics, because I can't see how it can be done.
He's toast. Trudeau's toast. I can't believe these people are our leaders, our leading countries.
Yeah.
You I really can't believe it. Can you get to Biden? But before that, we actually do have one casualty, one political casualty from the protests in Canada, and that is Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole.
Yeah,
he got voted out, and then he got voted out, and then he kind of did a video resignation. So, well, the protests, they did claim a victim.
Absolutely, and absolutely, and and good thing to know. I'm not an expert on Canadian politics, but one of the reasons why Trudeau has been able to survive for so long is because there's never been, it seems to me, proper opposition to him. Now, perhaps we're going to get a real opposition to him. And given what an appalling individual he is, maybe, finally, at last, the grassroots, and it's again a massive comment on our times, that it's had to come from below rather than from above, that that these protests are building up from below. Finally, we could see a proper opposition. In which case, given what a terrible man Trudeau is, I simply can't believe that he won't unravel. I have to say, maybe I'm being, sentimental about Canada, the country which saved Greece from famine in 1942, fact which many Canadians maybe are not aware of, but it did. There was a massive famine in Greece in 1942, and it was Canada that arranged to send food there. My father remembered it and told me much about it all his life. And it gave an enormous amount of goodwill to Canada with Greeks, a goodwill which I still feel. But of course, this is the Canada also of Lester Pearson, of Pierre Trudeau, who I was not always a huge admirer of, but who was nonetheless an important and charismatic leader.
He was a skilled politician. At least he was a skilled politician.
I mean, a Canada, that was a major force for good in international diplomacy. I mean, the quality of Canadian diplomacy was massively highly regarded, and Canada also has enormous goodwill behind it in Britain. Many people in Britain think of Canada as an incredibly well-run, prosperous country. To what extent that's true, still, I'm not sure, but that's the belief in Britain we all have. And to see Canada, this country that I've always looked up to, led by a person like Trudeau, is one of the reasons I think why I get so angry about this. And hopefully, with a proper opposition, that will end, and the Canada, which I still like to believe is the real Canada, will reassert itself.
Yeah. Let's move on to Biden.
Yeah. From the tragic, I can't call it sublime, the disgusting, in the case of Trudeau, the tragic in some ways in respect to Johnson, because there's clownish and ludicrous elements to it too. But he's the author of his own downfall, which is what a tragic hero, if you like, is all about. To the absolutely ridiculous, because this is the United States of America. This is the most powerful country in the world. This is the country which for the last century has made all the political weather. It's made all the big cultural changes. It's fought wars that in Europe which played decisive roles, and it is now led by an empty suit, by a president whose policies are failing on the domestic front, and which are so radical and so anti-American. They're not anti-American, so profoundly un-American, and whose foreign policy is disintegrating into shambles. I always start with the foreign policy first, and I did my little brief spiel at the start of this video about where we are and how all kinds of things are going on at the same time. But just look at the disastrous messaging. And, America, the United States of America, the country that invented marketing, that developed television, that invented modern journalism, that they can't do messaging anymore properly. They come up with this ludicrous story about this preposterous claim about a false flag, which you notice that even the press corps, and it wasn't just one journalist, even the press corps finally are starting to doubt. And this coming directly after we suddenly see them admit, well, this invasion isn't imminent after all. You can get the sense that people finally are starting to question the narrative that they're being sold. And always, when you are dealing with a major international confrontation, you have to be very careful to stick, if not exactly to the facts, to at least a narrative that is reconcilable with the facts. And of course, this administration has lost that completely. I've never seen anything like it.
Can I just stop you right there before you go further?
Yeah.
The U.S. is pulling this, the messaging of the U.S. is pulling this over and over again, pulling this trick. And you documented it. We talked about it, and you used your legal mind to explain what they're doing. It's not complicated, but you put it in context. And this happened during Russiagate, where they were basically telling Trump to prove a negative.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Prove you're not a Putin puppet.
Exactly.
Prove it. And today you come full circle, and then you had Ukraine Gate, and you had all these other things which you may want to talk about. But this type of messaging to me started during maybe it goes to WMDs as well. I mean, if you want to prove you don't have weapons of mass destruction, but they really hit it hard with Trump. Prove you're not a Putin puppet.
Yes.
And now we have Ned Price saying, well, Russia has to prove that they're not going to commit a false, that they're not going to invade Ukraine on the premises of a false flag. We're telling you, they're going to have to prove it. And everyone's just sitting there, including Matt Lee from the AP. They're saying, what the hell are you guys talking about?
Exactly.
I mean, how does Russia respond to this? How do journalists respond to this? How does anyone respond to this?
Yes.
Where's your evidence? No, the evidence is we're telling you, and they're going to have to prove us wrong. I mean, do you just want to address that? Because I really think the origins of this, a lot of it does have to do with Russiagate, with Trump, with Mueller, with all of that stuff.
Yes. I mean, it's exactly what you said, proving a negative, which it is virtually impossible to do. And more often than not, it is completely impossible to do. Now, the point about the Russiagate story was that people were fairly receptive to it. A lot of people were not everybody. We were never fooled by it. But a lot of people were fairly receptive to it because they didn't like Trump. So they wanted to believe the worst in him. But the point is, they've now played that card too long and too much. They've repeatedly come back and they've said, well, we can go back to WMD in Iraq. Saddam Hussein has this WMD. He's got to prove that he doesn't have them.
Prove you don't have them.
Prove he doesn't have them. It turned out he didn't actually have them, but you could never prove a negative. You can't. There's no. I mean, you call in the inspectors. The inspectors go around your country. He says, well, they must be hiding them somewhere, until eventually, as I said, they destroy Iraq, and then they come back and say, well, actually, he was actually telling the truth after all. He didn't really have them. So, I mean, that already, I think, was a bad blow to the credibility of the US media. But, that was all right. That was a while back. That didn't matter quite so much. It was a disaster in many, many respects. But this is a new administration. It's a Democrat administration. Those are Republicans who were saying all these bad things. We in the media are all Democrats. So we cut Democrats lots and lots of slack. Except, of course, the Democrats are coming up with story after story after story, which turns out in the end isn't true. And they come along and they say, well, you've got to believe me because, well, I'm the evidence. I'm the proof. The very fact that I'm saying it is the proof. And I think what really was the turning point in this particular latest narrative about the Russian invasion is Jen Psaki coming along and saying, well, this invasion isn't imminent. I mean, after telling us week after week after week that it is imminent, they then turn around and say that it isn't imminent. And then they come the following day up with this ludicrous story about this fake false flag involving child actors, Turkish drones, all that kind of thing, which, I mean, it stretches too far. I mean, there comes a point when people say to themselves, I just can't take this any longer. I mean, this is just, I can't fool myself anymore that this sort of thing is true. And I mean, the expression on what was his, I can't remember his name.
Matt Lee.
Exactly, his face. I mean, it said it all.
Yeah, you know what else this tells us? This latest exchange between Matt Lee and Ned Price, it was the U.S. State Department. We are 100% right. We talked about this since the beginning of this farce. That the people that are driving this, in the government right now in the Biden White House, is the State Department. It's Blinken, it's Newland, and it's all of these people that are driving this push for war.
Yes, exactly, absolutely, and that, I think, is the one good thing about all of this, because the deep state in America, which does exist, I'm not going to say any nice things about them. They're terrible people, but they don't want to get themselves into a situation where they openly and straightforwardly lose. And I think what's happening is that you have the ideologues, the Neocon ideologues in the State Department. The State Department seems to be full of such people. I mean, you saw that. By the way, that was where Ukraine Gate was really useful, because Ukraine Gate made us realize the kind of people who actually run things in the State Department. I mean, you remember all those extraordinary people coming out of the embassy in Kiev, coming along and giving all the evidence, that ludicrous ambassador, or those weird people who were, the officials at the embassy. So, I mean, and not just at the embassy, all kinds of other people in the State Department bureaucracy. So the State Department, packed full of ideologues, looking constantly for an opportunity to push their neocon agenda. And what I think has finally happened is that the Pentagon, which would have to fight any wars, and they know they can't fight a war against Russia in Ukraine. I mean, that's just not possible. I mean, that's insane. I mean, Russia is a nuclear power. It can overwhelm the US close to its own borders. It can't overwhelm the US in Germany or France. That's, the Russian army isn't configured to that point. It can't take on the US Navy on the high seas. That's absolutely impossible. It can't fight the US military in the Middle East if it came to that. But on its own borders, it absolutely can, and it would win. The Pentagon says, well, we're not going to get involved in this. This is folly. And I think what's also happened is the various economic agencies, the Treasury, the Commerce Department, the Federal Reserve Board, and we've had some information about this, which we could talk about. But all of these people have come along and said, look, what are you doing? This is insane. We have a cost of living crisis. We have inflation rising out of control. Your madcap schemes against Russia in Europe are threatening to undermine the financial system, undermine the reserve currency status of the dollar. It's not just going to be, it won't just be the Chinese who will be using, and the Russians who will be doing trade in euros. It'll be the Europeans too, because of course, if we if we forbid Russian banks to use dollars, how do the Europeans pay for their gas? They'll pay in euros. Now, that to a great extent already happens. But do you want to crystallize it? Do you want to consolidate it? Do you want to start getting into a situation where the entire trade in natural gas is conducted in euros instead of dollars? What if the Saudis who also, of course, sell massive amount of oil to China. China is their biggest customer. What do the Saudis say? Well, in that case, if you're paying the Russians in euros, why not pay us in euros too? I mean, you know, there are problems with using euros. There's problems in Europe, which we will no doubt come to in this program. But, you know, Federal Reserve Board, Treasury will say this is insane. Cutting off Russia from SWIFT is insane. That's part of the financial architecture that underpins the position of the United States. Do you really want to undermine SWIFT in that kind of way? And you want to stop energy supplies? You want to interrupt energy supplies? We're struggling to get on top of the inflation that your administration has created. Do you want to make that even worse? Do you want to intensify the cost of living crisis? So I think they've said enough. They don't speak because these people haven't got the megaphone that the State Department and its allies and the CIA do, because, you know, they play a role. But it was very, very interesting going through the actual replies, the real replies that the United States sent to the Russians. I did a massive, megalithic, long video on this, which you can see on my channel and you can find on our locals platform, in which I pass this reply. And it's extraordinary to see that what the United States actually is telling the Russians in private is, yes, we are prepared at some point to talk about NATO's open door policy. Yes, we do recognize that you may have a point about indivisible security. We don't agree with you on these points yet, but we are willing to enter into discussions with you about it. Now, that's not a breakthrough. That's not the United States saying, you know, we're going to agree with everything that you're saying. It's not the United States saying that we agree with anything that you're saying. But it is the United States signaling to the Russians that at some point we might agree, we might find common ground, we might address some of the concerns that you're bringing up. And that's not what you're hearing from the State Department. That's not what you're hearing from Blinken. That's not what you're hearing from Victoria Nuland, who was back talking on the various TV shows. And they're saying one thing in public, but whoever drafted those replies appears to have a somewhat different agenda from the one that they do.
Yeah, that's why you had the press conference with the State Department, because they read those replies, they saw those replies, and they said, we better act fast, cue up the false flag.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
the allegation of a false flag.
This is the point, because how do you stop? You're a Neocon. How do you stop these negotiations progressing? How do you stop? Yeah. You don't want these negotiations to progress. You don't want these negotiations to succeed, because if they succeed, your entire project in Europe disintegrates. You're well aware that all these powerful people, the Treasury, Commerce, Pentagon, all of the rest, are saying enough's enough. We want talks. We want substantive talks with the Russians. So how do you stop it? You stop it by instigating a war. It's the only way. It's the only way you can save this project now. So you talk up the threat of war. You talk about false flags. You create this atmosphere of tension. You say the Russians can't be trusted. You push the Ukrainians to start something, because that's, in a way, what this false flag story is all about. Because it's the only way you can stop this negotiation trundling forward and out of your control. So actually, the very fact that there are people in the United States who want to start pushing for substantive talks with the Russians tells us that we are in an incredibly dangerous moment, because there is hell hath no fury like a Neocon thwarted of its war.
And they do this all the time.
Absolutely.
Let's go back to Syria. And
This
every
is Syria.
time Trump
Yeah.
said, I'm pulling out of Syria, what did you
Absolutely.
get? I mean, literally the next day, what did you
Yes.
get?
Yes.
A weapons attack. Assad has to
Exactly.
go.
Exactly.
I mean, like clockwork. Every
Yeah.
time Trump came out and said, we're pulling out of Syria, no more. The next day, you get some sort of false flag in
Exactly.
Syria. The
Exactly.
minute Trump, when he was campaigning, said that it would be good if the United States sat down and spoke with Russia, so
Yes.
that Russia doesn't get pushed too much towards
Yes.
the Chinese sphere.
Yes.
The neocons went crazy.
Absolutely.
That's what if you want my honest take on it, the reason there was so much hatred towards Trump was not because of the Charlottesville stuff. I think that was BS.
Well,
I think the minute Trump said rapprochement with Russia,
yeah, man.
I think that's when they said, no way.
Exactly.
We're gonna lose our gravy train of NATO. We're gonna lose our
Exactly.
military industrial complex gravy train. We're gonna lose our We Hate Russia think tanks and all the money there. They said, no way, this guy has to go.
Exactly. Now, can I just say something about that? Because, of course, if the substantive negotiations, which we are seeing possibly start now, had happened in 2017, which is what Trump wanted, the United States would have been in a far stronger position. Delaying them, and of course, I'm not even sure they're even going to happen, but delaying them has left the United States in an extremely weak position now. And of course, it's got an administration which is all over the place, a Secretary of State who is visibly incompetent. I mean, he's steamrolled by Lavrov. He's overwhelmed by Wang Yi. I mean, he's absolutely not someone you want to put up in a negotiation against guys like that. I mean, so we're in a far weaker position now than we would have been in back in 2017, 5 years ago, when this negotiation, this substantive negotiation, could have happened. And can I just say one additional point? When we talk about the State Department, we must also understand that it's also the CIA, because that's the other thing that's happened. Note that the director of the CIA, William Burns, is a former State Department official. And the CIA has been always promoting, spreading these false stories ever since Russiagate, or at least a faction within the CIA has done. And they're at it again. We have William Burns traveling around Europe, hawking photos of this Russian buildup. And of course, people are going and are now discovering that those photos were cropped, and they give a completely different, the real photos, the actual full photos would have shown something completely different from what the CIA, William Burns and the others are making us think that they say. So, and of course, presumably, some people in the media, Matt Lee, for all I know that. And then, of course, we have the State Department say, well, believe me, because I'm the evidence.
Yeah. And if you don't believe me, then you're a Putin puppet.
Well, you're a Putin.
And you're being paid by Russia.
And you're being paid by Russia.
Which, even here in this chat, you still have people go, you guys are paid by Russia. How much is Russia paying you guys? Because we want to report the truth as to what's going on.
Well, indeed,
because
exactly.
we could easily parrot CNN and say, oh, yeah, there's 200,000 Russians on the border, and they're going to invade Ukraine anytime. And the reason they're going to invade Ukraine, everybody, is because Putin's an evil dictator. He wants to recreate the Soviet Union. And it's very important to send American soldiers, men and women, to die in Ukraine in order to fight for democracy, because Ukraine is a bastion of democracy. Everyone knows that.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
No American patriot should want to send soldiers, US soldiers, into a confrontation with Russia where Russia would win and there would be a debacle for the United States. That is not, you're not being patriotic towards the United States by doing that. No American patriot should tell the American people things that are simply not true and lead them up those kind of dangerous avenues. The important thing to understand is that the neocons and their fellow travelers are not American patriots. They are ideologues. They want to use American power to promote their own particular vision of what the world should be. They're not interested in the United States, in its people, in the life of the United States. And of course, all you have to see in order to understand that is the way they conduct the domestic policy of the United States, they and their fellow travelers, and the kind of things they do there. And so I make no apology for talking about these realities. And, this business about anybody who disagrees with these fantasies that's been spread is a Putin puppet. That simply shows the moral bankruptcy of the people who are making that kind of claim.
Yeah. Just look at Trudeau, everybody. These people don't care about anybody or anything. They don't care about their country. They don't care about the citizens. They don't care about anything.
Absolutely.
How much more evidence do you need? But still, you have people saying, "Oh, no. Russia's going to invade. Democracy, we have to fight for democracy. They're bad. We're good."
Yes.
Let's get some questions in. Alexander, we have a lot of questions queued up.
I bet we do.
Yeah. Zariel, I see Zariel is in the house. How are you doing, Zariel? Moderating as well. And let's see. We got Hunger, who says the ethos of the West is anti-fascism. The raison d'etre of both parties is about fighting fascism, whether the threat is real or imagined.
Well,
and
indeed.
Part 2, it's part 1 of 2, and part 2 of that chat is any rightward shift is deemed as sliding towards fascism. It is basically illegal to be a pre-1945 or 19th century conservative.
Absolutely, completely true. So entirely true. I wouldn't go even as far back as 1945. An Eisenhower conservative is very difficult to be nowadays. Any kind of conservative, it's very difficult.
A JFK liberal is impossible.
A JFK liberal is impossible to be. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And Valies is in the house as well. Welcome, Valies as well, moderating. Go ahead, Alexander.
No, I was going to say, even a European Social Democrat, it's impossible to be. I know. I used to be one.
Yeah. There is no such thing as labor. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn couldn't survive.
No, I know, absolutely. And of course, he was targeted in exactly the same kind of tropes that we see being used against everybody else. I mean, this is a left that is completely out of control. It's completely authoritarian, and it defines everybody who doesn't agree with it as, well,
you're either a globalist or you're not a globalist.
Exactly.
To me, I think it's become that simple. You're either a globalist or you're not a globalist.
Exactly.
End of story.
Exactly. Anybody who is not of them is against them. By the way, that's what the Bolsheviks used to say. They used to say, anybody who's not with us is against us.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Anatoly says, Ukraine a smokescreen, Taiwan the real target?
No, I don't think it's just a smokescreen. I think from the perspective of the Pentagon, Ukraine is a massive embarrassment and a distraction, because, of course, from their point of view, Ukraine isn't important. This is an important thing to understand. It's not geostrategically important. I mean, it is an act of utter folly for the United States to commit itself to Ukraine, which is undefendable, and it's got a small economy, which is irrelevant in terms of the global economy. Taiwan is, I think somebody's worked out, it's about 20 times, maybe more than that, richer than Ukraine. And it is essential to the global economy. And of course, there's also this view, which I don't fully understand or entirely share, that, it's this unsinkable aircraft carrier that we can't allow the Chinese to get hold of. So if you're a Pentagon planner, if you're somebody who works in the economic agencies of the US government, Taiwan matters in a way that Ukraine doesn't. So you have to find some means to, prevent the Chinese getting hold of Taiwan. And what this Ukraine crisis is doing is it's taking your focus away from that. And at the same time, it's doing things which is making China potentially much stronger in terms of a confrontation with the United States, because China is this giant manufacturing economy, but it's short of raw materials, it's short of energy, and it has to import these through, by sea. The United States has the world's mightiest navy and will continue to for at least the next decade, despite the Chinese naval buildup. It could, in theory, interrupt those supplies of raw materials and food and energy. And what's now happening is that China is deepening its alliance with Russia, which can provide China with food, energy, and raw materials, bypassing those sea routes that are so crucial for the United States. So Ukraine, for these people, for the people who really, ought to be thinking about these things in the Pentagon and in the various economic agencies of the US government, Ukraine for them is an embarrassment and a distraction. It's an ideological enterprise which is of no utility to the United States at all.
Yeah. Freedom Autopsy Report says, as a Christian, America shall pay the price for turning against God. Russia is on the rise because it has embraced Christianity.
Well, indeed, I understand that. An American friend of mine reminded me of that passage in Isaiah. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? Well, I wouldn't call the United States Lucifer, but certainly it was the son of the morning. And I hope it doesn't, have fall in that kind of way. But that's all I'm going to say about that.
Well, going back to the Bolsheviks, there was a time when you couldn't practice Christianity.
Well, indeed, absolutely. Well, indeed, if you tried, you found yourself in tremendous difficulties. That's when I say tremendous difficulties. You'd ended up in the gulag, or you could be killed.
Yeah. Sanjeva Harith says, Moscow named third best metropolis in the world, including first in quality of life by the United Nations. What next? You will be telling me that they have electricity. Thank you, Sanjeva, for that.
Well, it's absolutely. We've both been to Moscow. I mean, I haven't been there for a couple of years. I think Alex has been, but Alex has lived there. I've never done that. I've
lived there when it was the Soviet Union as well. That's why I've had some people say, "Oh, you don't know anything about communism or living under communism." No, I know exactly what it is like to live under communism. Thank you very much. Yeah. Anyway, go on.
But this is. I mean, I am. All I will say is this: I am absolutely not surprised by that rating. Now, it may surprise people in Britain and people in France and even people in Germany too. But certainly, I would say that the quality of life in Moscow today is definitely better than in London, Paris, or Berlin. Now, that is something that is almost beyond imagination if you were to take your mind back 30 years ago. But I mean, I would hold to it, absolutely.
I've lived in many cities and been to many cities, and I've been to London a bunch as well. Yes. There is no doubt that Moscow is, for me, I would say it's the best mega city to live in.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to live in a huge city,
exactly,
then I would say that Moscow is the best. And I've lived in New York City, and I've been to London a bunch, and a lot of other places. Yes. Moscow is one of those cities that has been improving every year, almost every day. It makes improvements.
Yes, exactly. And as I said, people outside, the small group of people who travel there, I think are not aware of this. It's also, by the way, an extraordinary cultural hub to a degree, again, which, well, obviously that's part of this, but to a degree that I think isn't understood. Here again, it's left Paris, London, and Berlin behind. The only place which, in cultural terms, could once upon a time that I've known compare with Moscow as it is now is New York.
Now, no, not now, but
Maybe
back
not
in
now. I
maybe
haven't
under
been to New York
Giuliani,
since.
those times,
Yes,
yes,
yes.
no doubt about it. New York was the best.
I mean, I haven't been to
But
New York for a long time, but
what De
I mean,
Blasio did to New York was, I
yeah,
mean, just
yeah,
criminal,
yes,
criminal.
yes, yes.
And we have to stress, we're talking about mega cities,
Yeah,
10,
megacities.
10, 15 million. I mean,
Yeah,
you can go to like Krakow, which is just a beautiful, amazing city,
absolutely.
or Belgrade, or
Yeah, absolutely.
Warsaw and Budapest.
Yes,
But we're talking cities which are, 10, 15 million in
yes.
population. Yeah.
Indeed, or Munich, for example, which
Yeah,
again I haven't
Munich,
been to for a
yes.
while, but I mean, those sort of places have a wonderful lifestyle. Perhaps in some ways a better one. I would say this: if you're young, just as once upon a time, if you were young, New York was the place to be. If you're young, I mean, Moscow has a huge amount of offer now.
Yeah, I agree with that. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Ryan says, I believe Putin is taking center stage as the most important political leader in the world. Is that fair to say? All
Well, absolutely.
countries, small and large, east or west, seem to care more about Putin than Biden. Is that
Well,
fair?
that's absolutely true. And that's, again, something Americans might want to take note of. Who does everybody want to speak to? I mean, look at this farce of Boris Johnson trying to arrange this call with Putin. I mean, the French are going to meet him, the Germans are going to meet him, the Italians spoke to him, all the leaders of all of these countries. We now have the Saudis wanting him to visit their country. Erdogan wants him to visit Turkey. He's in China now. Everybody wants to talk to Putin. Putin is the person around whom international diplomacy revolves. I mean, it's astonishing. I can remember the old days. I can remember the 1970s, where I found Kissinger an appalling individual, but nonetheless, everybody wanted to talk to Kissinger. Everybody wanted to talk to Kissinger. Everybody wanted to talk to Nixon. The United States was the pivot of international diplomacy. I don't remember JFK. It was just before my time, but I remember many people talking about this, and they would say the same, that JFK was the pivot around. Everybody wanted to talk to him. Today it's Putin, and this is in his 22nd year of power. I mean, it's quite remarkable.
Even if you
it's
go
true.
back to if you go back to, say, I don't know, maybe Reagan and James
Reagan,
Baker.
Reagan
I mean,
again.
Baker
James Baker.
was an excellent diplomat.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely. James Baker was he was the person everybody wanted to talk to. I mean, a situation where the United States has ceded leadership in international diplomacy to the Russians, to Putin, to Lavrov, is one that Americans ought to be concerned about. And those who call us and call others like us Putin puppets, well, all you have to do is go to the respective websites of the White House and the Kremlin and see who speaks most to world leaders nowadays.
yeah. And before I get to another super chat, you could also make the argument for Orban as well.
Absolutely.
Yes, Russia is a bigger country, it's a more powerful country, but if you're a leader with just some damn common sense,
yes, and courage,
someone who looks after the courage and looks after the interest of your country, and makes relatively good, sound decisions, people are going to want to follow you and talk to you.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, look at Orban.
Absolutely.
People are following the guy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, I wasn't an unequivocal supporter while she was Prime Minister. Margaret Thatcher was somebody everybody wanted to talk to because, again, whatever it was, she was a very strong personality. And you could say that while she was Prime Minister, Britain punched way above its weight. And Orban has done that and some more because, of course, Hungary is a much smaller country than Britain. And the contrast between the mess of Boris Johnson's handling of diplomacy over the last week and the skill with which Orban has promoted the interests of his own country and established himself on the political and diplomatic map is extraordinary. And for a British person, a very painful thing.
Yeah. Let's see here. Dominique sent a message.
Mm.
Just a super chat. Thank you very much, Dominique, for that. And Filipina Traveler TV says, thank you, Alex and Alexandra, for a very interesting topic again. Happy weekend, everybody. Watching from Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And greetings to everyone in Switzerland. Life of Brian says, I've often wondered why Trudeau draws Alex M's special ire, given how awful our world leaders are.
Absolutely,
Well, it's not over yet, but it makes sense now. Does Alex know anything else from the drama teaching days?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't. I just have to say that the moment I saw him, I just knew there was something fundamentally fake about this man. I mean, when I say fake in an unattractive way. So he always provoked a reaction in me, and as I said, it's a very strong one, and one I struggle to sometimes contain, and that's saying a lot about me, because usually I'm able to control my emotions quite well.
Yeah. Irish Partisan, go on the truckers. Thank you very much for that. Yeah. Irish Partisan. And Kurt says, I still believe Justin Trudeau is telling the truth and went into isolating because of the coup. I even heard it was the convoy variant. Yeah, the convoy variant. That's the dangerous one. Thank you, Kurt, for that. And Thomas Gibson sends us 2 super stickers. Thank you. Tim Gibson sends us 2 super stickers. Thank you very much for that. 3 super stickers. 4, 5, 6.
My good.
6 super stickers. Thank you very much, Tim, for that. That's awesome. Life of Brian says the cravenness of the Canadian media is limitless. Do the Canadians buy what the media is selling?
Well, I hope not is the answer. I mean, I haven't obviously followed the Canadian media with that degree of attention, but I mean, I've heard the same thing, and I can't believe that Canadians now are being fooled about it. The fact that O'Toole has been forced to step down is an increasing sign, as well as the scale of these protests, that more and more people are not just not buying these narratives any longer.
Yeah, the media in Canada is just it's god awful. The mainstream media, god awful. Sparky says, next to Justin Castro's mom, Kamala's a nun. Thank you very much for that, Sparky.
Well, I think it's one thing I'd say about Kamala is that, I mean, Justin is awful. Kamala is, frankly, far less intelligent than he is. So, I mean, she in fact, she's not. I mean, she's frankly at times downright stupid. I'm sorry.
You know what Trudeau is? You know what
Yeah.
Trudeau is? That's very makes him very dangerous.
Yeah.
He's very manipulative
exactly,
in an evil way.
That is exactly
in an
right.
evil way.
That is exactly right. And in fact, I suspect, Alex, that you put your finger on what it is about him that I really don't like. I mean, I just don't like manipulative people. Kamala isn't manipulative in that kind of way. I mean, she just isn't. She doesn't have the brain power to be straightforward. But anyway, it's not her personality. But Trudeau is extremely manipulative, and I just people like that always annoy, antagonize me. I'll tell you somebody else who's extremely manipulative in exactly the same way, and why Americans dislike her, and that's Hillary Clinton. She's a very, very manipulative individual, as we're discovering, by the way, with every piece of information that John Durham is providing us with.
Didn't they talk to each other, Trudeau? And what was the incident that Trudeau called her up, or she called Trudeau up? I forgot. I know the chat will remind me.
Absolutely.
But it happened like a year or 2 ago, where Trudeau actually called her up and like he got some sort of information from her before going to the actual government. Something happened there.
I seem to remember that.
Yeah, I remember it too.
By the way, Obama was manipulative on an even greater scale than Trudeau and Hillary are. He was the most manipulative president I can ever remember. But he was somebody who was very careful in his use of words. I mean, he would not have made the mistake that Trudeau has done.
Yeah, Trudeau made a big mistake with those tweets and those words and that speech. My God.
Yes.
Gordon So HK158. Thank you very much, Gordon, for that. Thank you for your analysis and conversation. I so enjoy your vision on things. Thank you very much for that. And Yamabushi says, thanks to you guys, I now take Russian lessons from a charming lady in St. Petersburg and have a much more enlightened view of geopolitics. Mom has a secret crush on Alexander, by the way. Keep up the great work.
One day, no, I mean, go to Moscow, but also go to St. Petersburg too. Profoundly different cities, by the way. They're very unlike each other. They're as different from each other as London is from Paris, despite, apart from the fact that they have the same language. But St. Petersburg is an extraordinary city. Again, tremendous art galleries, museums, culture, and life as well. But a place where you are much closer in some ways to the old Russia, the old pre-revolutionary Russia, than you are in Moscow, because it's been preserved so carefully.
If you like museums, then St. Petersburg is a good city to visit.
It's a very good city to visit. Museums, St. Petersburg, the only places I know that are on that kind of scale are Paris and New York. I mean, both in terms of classical art, but also modern arts too.
Let's see here. They have a really good museum for Pushkin as well, Alexander. Where Pushkin, his home. Yeah.
I've never been to it. I've heard about it. I've never been to it. I know where it is. I've seen it.
Yeah, they take you through his home and all the way to his death, and it's an interesting tour.
Yes.
Raphael says Putin won. Putin the Peter the Great of 2022.
Yeah, I think there's something in that. I mean, he's obviously not as ferocious a person as Peter the Great was. I mean, Peter the Great was a titanically ruthless and brutal person, and if you follow Russian history well, you know that he did some pretty grim and dreadful things, which Putin has never done anything like that. Another comparison which I've heard people make is Putin and Bismarck, because Bismarck also had this tremendous diplomatic skill and this tremendous understanding of foreign policy that
a lot of people overlook Bismarck.
Exactly. Absolutely, well, indeed, yeah. They do overlook Bismarck. I studied him, so this is another, and Bismarck is a very interesting man, and there's a lot about Putin that reminds me of Bismarck. They're both conservatives, both patriots, both people who had a very keen understanding on both the uses and limits of power, both very good managers of their respective societies and countries, and both ultimately, this has surprised people about Bismarck, ultimately men of peace. I mean, Bismarck, after he unified Germany, which he did through wars and things, he pursued a policy of preserving peace in Europe. And when things began to go wrong after he was dismissed by the Kaiser, he became increasingly concerned about the direction the policy in Germany was taking. And he was very, very scathing about Germany's versions of the kind of neocons that we see in the United States today. So I think that's a comparison I would also endorse.
Douglas says Boris Johnson can't keep the juggling act going. Will the City of London back a deal with with EU Liz Truss, USA Michael Gove, or India Rishi Sunak?
It's entirely possible that that's exactly what's going to happen. He's destroying his government. Boris Johnson is destroying his government. What he needed to do after Brexit was to sit down and work hard and build on Brexit. He had every opportunity to do that. But Boris is not a manager. He's bored by that kind of thing. And when the coup came, I'm afraid he just didn't have the skills to handle it well. And he retreated into the kind of self-indulgence and laziness which I'm afraid is his massive affliction and his inability to be serious. And I'm afraid also, and this is now becoming, people are reporting this. I saw the Daily Telegraph talking about this. He's got a drinks problem. I mean, now I think I could say that straightforwardly. He drinks too much, which as Prime Minister, you should be very careful about doing. By the way, Margaret Thatcher was also somebody who could be a very hard drinker, but she kept it under control. Boris
kept it together.
kept it together. Boris just doesn't know how to do that. And so as a result, everything is falling apart. It's unraveling. And unfortunately, when you look at the people who could step in and take over from him, I'm afraid all of them, and I think, named all the right people, Gove, Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak. And it's increasingly now looking like Sunak. I think they will do exactly the kind of policies and make exactly the kind of allies that you say, and it will be very much rapprochement with the EU.
I agree with that. Irish Partisan says, what do you think about Western media whitewashing and rehabilitating fascism? I saw Dan Rivers interviewing a Ukrainian soldier on ITV who was wearing the Banderite red and black patch, and zilch said about it.
Absolutely.
Is it deliberate is the question.
Absolutely, it's deliberate. Well, it's not just, we have to be deliberate, is that they absolutely know that it's happening. They know it's going on. So they are deliberately concealing it, and they are deliberately talking up these people as if they were the heroic patriots.
No one talks about Bandera.
For Ukraine. Nobody talks about
no one
Bandera.
Mentions Bandera.
Nobody mentions Bandera. Nobody mentions the fact that streets and squares are being named after him and other equally unattractive, or sometimes even more unattractive.
How does Poland reconcile that to the Polish government? I mean, I always have a very difficult time understanding how the Polish government reconciles its staunch support for Ukraine, especially the Banderite part of Ukraine. I really do. I have a very hard time understanding it.
Well, it comes back to what you said before in one of our programs, Alex. This obsession with Russia clouds their judgment and their clarity. It takes away their clarity. So they don't want to see it. And I'm sure lots of Poles are aware of it. And if there's people from Poland, following us, perhaps they can comment about this, because, of course, Bandera and his followers were even more anti-Polish in some respects than they were anti-Russian. A fact that you would have thought a Polish government would be particularly worried about. Orban talks about these things. The Polish government, which is friends with Orban, needs to listen to what he's saying about it, and they need to adjust their policies. But then, there's so much about Polish foreign policy that is wrong at the moment. It's still obsessed with old phantoms from the past. I understand that for Poles that's a tough thing to say, because, of course, it's only 30 years ago that the Soviet Union went away and communism ended and all of that. But they need to I think Poles, and there are many Poles I know who go to Russia, and many Russians, by the way, go to Poland, and there's lots of cultural interchange between the two countries. Poland needs to understand the extent to which Russia has changed, and the fact that this is the best moment now to achieve that historic reconciliation between these two nations, which is urgently needed for the peace of Europe, and specifically for peace in Ukraine, because Poland and Russia have a community of interest in putting this genie that we've seen in Ukraine, this terrible genie of Banderaism and the rest, back in its bottle, because it's a danger to both.
Yeah, people don't understand how dangerous these groups are, especially specifically in the west of Ukraine. These Banderite groups are, and they have a lot of power in Kiev. They're a smaller faction, but they exert a lot of power.
Absolutely.
And they exert it with violence.
Absolutely. Once upon a time, I used to hear lots of stories, this is, in old days, when people talked about the events of the 1940s, and they used to talk about the Ukrainian guards in places like Treblinka, the Nazi camp. And who do you think these Ukrainian guards were? What political movement did these guards come from? From the political movements led by Bandera and other people like him, which are the ancestors of the forces that are active in Ukraine today. But, we could talk about Ukrainian guards once upon a time, in the 70s and 80s, in places like Treblinka. We're not allowed to talk about them today. And Poles who have knowledge of what happened in 1943 when the Warsaw Ghetto was crushed, and also about what the Germans did in 1944, know the role that all Ukrainian auxiliaries played. And I say Ukrainian auxiliaries, I don't want to lump all Ukrainians together, but there were those people there. And again, we're talking about the lineal ancestors of these same people who are pursuing these kind of policies in Ukraine today. The vast majority of Ukrainians in the 1940s staunchly opposed and fought these people. And I'm sure the same would be true today. What gives these people leverage is that they get the kind of support from the West that Irish Partisan was talking about.
Yeah, it's no different than Obama funding IS.
Yeah,
no different. Branded them moderate rebels, but make no mistake about it. The Obama administration was funding IS in the hopes that they would overthrow the Assad government. What plan they had for after IS overthrew the Assad government, who the hell knows what they were thinking. But that was their goal. And what you're seeing in Ukraine is the exact same thing.
Exactly.
You are seeing all these weapons that go to these groups, like the Azov Battalion and all these Banderite groups. These guys are nasty, nasty forces. Irish Partisan says it best. These are the real deal fascists. I mean, these guys are the real deal.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is not the fictitious stuff that AOC talks about in the United States.
No.
These guys are the real freaking deal. And people are kidding themselves if they think that the Russians are going to allow these forces on their borders.
Exactly.
If there's one thing that Russia is very good at, it's getting rid of NAZIs.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely. You only have to spend some time there to know.
So thank you, Irish Partisan, for that. And Freedom Autopsy Report says Biden has had so many brain surgeries and so much brain matter removed that the only sitting president with less brain matter was John. Oh my God. Okay. I don't really want JFK's assassination. It's kind of graphic, but hey.
Okay.
Thank you, Freedom Autopsy Report, for that. I liked JFK, Alexander.
Well, absolutely. I mean, he was a leader. And by the way, I mean, there was that film that was made in the 50s, which perhaps built it up a bit. But apparently the stories about him, as a naval officer during the Second World War, and the courage that he showed there, apparently are fundamentally true. The film is apparently accurate. So he was a brave naval officer, a tremendous leader, a tremendous orator, and an inspiring person. Now, he wasn't without his faults, as all of us have, and perhaps because he was a particularly charismatic and extraordinary man, some of those faults were particularly vivid. But he was a leader. He was a president. He was somebody people could look up to and admire, and his handling of foreign policy, and especially as he began to find his way, and his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis was extraordinarily skilled.
Yeah. I always get sad when I hear about things about JFK.
Yeah. I was just before you proceed, I was talking to Scott Ritter the other day, and he was talking also about JFK and his belief that if JFK had lived, the direction of foreign policy, the whole structure of the world would have been profoundly different, because he was working towards a completely different world architecture and a true peace treaty in Europe, which would have involved Germany and the Soviets. Well, I mean, perhaps Scott Ritter is better informed about these. Well, he's clearly better informed about these things than me, but he too thinks that he was a tremendous president.
Yeah, they say that's one of the reasons they got to him, is because he wanted to to re-envision the world.
The world, yes.
All right. Raphael says, after watching the debacle in front of the Security Council, we must admit that Russia and China no longer has any respect for the U.S. Sad position.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I have to say, I mean, I'm somebody who does take an interest in UN Security Council debates, because they're barely reported nowadays, but it is the cockpit of diplomacy. It's where the world powers meet and maneuver, and you can see the various statements made, and you also see the other countries, the countries that are not part of the blocs, the non-aligned states, if you like. That's their opportunity to speak out. And I have never seen such an utterly embarrassing debacle. I mean, why the Blinken Liz Truss team decided to call this session, what they think they would achieve by doing it, I have absolutely no idea. And by the way, the Russians gave them a way out. They said, we don't think there should be a session, but they insisted on it, and they got pulped. And they didn't get pulped so much by the Russians and the Chinese. The Russians and the Chinese just sat back and let country after country, Brazil, India, Mexico, Ghana, Kenya, Gabon, UAE, all come along and say, calm down, cool down, quiet diplomacy is needed. This isn't a real crisis, but if you make it one, we're all going to suffer. And, the Russians are saying there isn't going to be a war. As one of the ambassadors said, they've actually made a unilateral declaration of non-aggression. They said they're not going to invade Ukraine. So what more is there to discuss? You have got to calm down. Listening to it all, watching it all is embarrassing. And we talk about, JFK. Again, the way that JFK and I think it was Adlai Stevenson at the Security Council completely outmaneuvered the Soviets during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Seeing the opposite happen this time in such a grotesque way, it really made one feel embarrassed.
Yeah. Heyman says, when you try to defend everywhere, you defend nada.
Absolutely. Frederick the Great, by the way. Those who try to defend everything defend nothing. It's absolutely true.
Well said. Heyman. And Anatoly says, can the UK Boris repeat the Russian miracle of 1996?
Well, that I think refers to Yeltsin's re-election.
Yes, I believe so.
I think so. I don't think so, to be honest. The difference about the political system in Russia in the 1990s was that it was utterly, profoundly corrupt to a degree that is difficult to even conceive of. And it was also pretty ruthless in the sense that it was very difficult to challenge outcomes. And of course, the manipulation and electoral corruption was just off the scale, with the United States being involved in all of that. And nobody's going to come to Boris's help in that kind of way. And the political system in Britain, decayed and run down though it is, well, we haven't fallen to that level.
Heyman says, disposing of all our allies to defend, in quotes, to defend Taiwan.
Well, indeed. Well, you see, this is what's so distressing about this, because you don't need to dispose of all your allies. I mean, the US ambassador to Russia, John Sullivan, who comes across to me, by the way, as a decent man, made this point, that the Russians are being unreasonable. And, it would be what the Russians are saying is the equivalent of Ukraine demanding that Russia quit the Collective Security Treaty Organization, because that's the way to make Ukraine safe. But Russia has never asked that any single country that is now a member of NATO quit NATO. They don't say, but Poland, Bulgaria, Slovakia, all those countries quit NATO. They don't say that Ukraine should sign up to alliances with Russia or realign its policies with Russia. What they're asking for is a commitment that NATO expansion cease. That's all. That's all that they're asking for. They also want forces that were positioned close to their borders pulled back. But I'm sure, that was agreed. There would be a relaxation of tension and things could be sorted out, which would mean that, the pullback of those forces is reciprocated in some way. So the Russians are not asking the Americans to drop a single ally. So the US doesn't have to make that kind of concession. The Russians were asking that. Well, that would be unreasonable and that would be difficult. But it's not what the Russians are asking for. So, we mustn't reduce it to that kind of, absolutism. We fall into a trap if we do that. What the Russians are saying is we were given a whole lot of promises in 1990 about NATO not expanding east, which were never honored. We signed all kinds of declarations in Istanbul in 1999 and in Astana in 2010, which the US is not honoring. So let's get back to those agreements and let's agree peace in Europe.
Yeah. Tony Manolis is a new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Tony. And Clara Wellen, thank you for your 50 Australian dollar super chat. Thank you very much for that. And let's see. Basha B says, off topic, but the green agenda is impacting my hometown with a clean air zone fines hitting smaller businesses and owners of older vehicles. Given the universal adoption of the green agenda, I am now politically homeless.
Well, there you go. Can I just say it's the same in London, in that our mayor, Sadiq Khan, is now pushing the green agenda relentlessly. And he's expanded the zone where basically any car that isn't an electrically driven car now gets charged. And the word is that within central London, it's not going to be very long before you are obliged to use electric cars or be fined. So, we're going through the same sort of pattern. And of course, I have to travel around London quite a lot. I have to do all kinds of things. Sometimes I use the tube, the underground, the metro here. But quite often I take the cab. And of course, all the people who are drivers, both minicabs or Uber drivers and all of this, they're all complaining about this. And the Uber drivers are all telling me that they're being strong-armed by Uber, which is being strong-armed by Boris Johnson, by Sadiq Khan, to go electric. And they don't want to do it because it doesn't make sense for them and it's too expensive. So we're seeing exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same because, of course, Boris is also fervidly green. There is no political alternative offered in London to this policy. It's being forced on people. Many of them are very unhappy, but they don't have any alternative options to vote for.
Yeah. Martin Bosch says, is it mankind's only hope a new balance of powers between the US, Europe, and Russia, China?
Well, you could have a balance of power. And I mean, in some ways, that would be actually certainly be an improvement over what we have now, in the sense a balance of power means an acceptance by all the great powers that, they shouldn't, push against each other's interests, and that the overriding priority is to preserve peace. Neocons, by the way, never talk about peace. They talk about values. Notice that this is a different thing. They talk about expanding and extending and promoting their values. They never talk about achieving peace through a balance of power. But I actually think that, at least in Europe, we could do better than that. And that is that if we agreed a proper security architecture of the kind that was promised, by the way, at the end of the Cold War, then we would actually have not just a peace that is based on balance of power, balance of military power, but actually a genuine peace in which countries feel secure, people are able to move around, businesses are able to operate without, being interfered with, and people would be allowed to get on with their lives. And I think that could happen, but it's not happening. And one consequence, as we saw at the start of the program, is that the Russians are giving up on Europe and are refocusing on China. And they can do that. It wasn't what they wanted to do. But I think it's, in a way, a sad thing that it's come to that.
Yeah. Raphael says, Boris, in front of the House the day the report came out, what a display of incompetence. Talking about Russia that day was pure demagoguery. Sad time.
It was, and it was so inappropriate. And of course, he compounded his problems by engaging in this shambolic attempt at diplomacy over the subsequent days, flying to Kiev, meeting Zelensky, having nothing very much to say, being grilled about his domestic problems at home in the press conference in Kiev, unable to speak to Putin when he wanted to speak to Putin, kept waiting by Putin, and then he ended up talking to Putin, and he's got nothing really new to say to Putin anyway. And I mean, the whole thing came across as completely, unreal, and with serious diplomacy being undertaken by other countries. Macron, whom I, stress again, I'm no fan of Macron's. I don't like him. But at least he's negotiating. He's talking to Putin in a serious way. Olaf Scholz, gradually getting his act together. Don't know what kind of a person he's going to turn out to be, but he's talking about going to Moscow. He's got something to talk about. Orban carrying out exceptionally impressive diplomacy in Moscow. And of course, the Americans sending their written agreements with all the rest. They're still a great power. And what we have is a prime minister behaving in this dreadful way and making a mess of things in the House of Commons, making his foreign policy look ridiculous. And all of that feeds back in and it undermines him at home. And I think, I've been willing up to now to give Boris time to try and get things together. But I've lost patience with him myself now.
Yeah. He blew off a phone call with Putin. It's just incredible. Sparky says a Greek immigrant restaurateur in Canada invented Hawaiian pizza. That is true.
Absolutely.
That is true. Yeah. Thank you very much, Sparky, for that. Blowbum says, why do you think Russia is selling its gold now?
I'm not aware it is. I'm not aware it's selling its gold at all, actually. I follow Russian economic news extremely closely, but I've seen no sign of that happening.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard that either. But anyway, all right, interesting if it's true. Zarael says, same day Secretary of Defense said imminent while Jen retracts.
Yeah.
So did Lloyd Austin say imminent?
Quite possibly. I have to say again, this is a defense secretary who, to be straightforward about it, is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Again, I'm sorry to say this, but it seems to me that he's been picked for all the wrong reasons. And I don't want to say too
he's
obviously.
A Lockheed. Is he a Lockheed Martin guy or?
Well, I know he's a Lockheed Martin, whatever it is. But he just isn't. He just doesn't come across to me as very bright. Yeah. Exactly, that's why they chose him. But it's also because he ticks the right box, just as Kamala did.
I agree, but I think mostly, I think it's. The guy came straight from. I don't know if it's like I said, Lockheed or Raytheon. He came straight from the boardroom to the Pentagon. Talk about a revolving door. at least take a year off before you go back into government. I mean, God.
Yeah.
Kurt Fromm says, what do you think about Klaus Schwab saying that he has control of a majority of elected leaders of the world? And how do you think it happened?
Well, I suspect it's probably an exaggeration, but it's true in Europe and it's true in the West.
Well,
I mean, yeah.
Well, a lot of people are talking about the fact that Klaus Schwab also said that, I believe he said Putin and Merkel were, I don't know if he said they came from his school. I don't think they went to his school, but he said they were part of the World Economic Forum. I'm not sure. Maybe they did go to his young leaders school.
Well,
I don't know, but
no,
he was bragging about that.
Putin certainly didn't. Merkel, for all I know, did.
Did
but,
she?
But Putin's, yeah.
I mean, I know Macron, Trudeau, I believe Rutte, these guys. I'm unsure about Merkel and Putin, but
I know. I mean, what I will say is this. I mean, I think he has a huge influence in Europe because, again, I've said this many times about Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. The thing you must understand about it is that it is European old money. That's its basis. It was, European aristocrats, not people with strong democratic feelings, but people very involved in financial matters because aristocrats, they don't invest their money in industries, they don't have much dealings with workers, they go into financial operations, they meet for their holidays when they go skiing, they go on their skiing holidays. Klaus Schwab brought them all together and the World Economic Forum was born, and they have enormous power, tremendous influence in Europe, that eventually extended to the United States as well, because, well, it's not difficult to do that. And I think that he does have that huge influence, that he does have his school, and it's all controlled that way. I don't think he controls everybody in quite the way that he claims he does. And the fact that he's claiming that he controls everybody shows that in reality he doesn't. But certainly he has far too much power and far too much influence, as these kind of entities always do. And wielding that kind of power is incompatible with democratic systems.
Yeah.
But then aristocrats are not into democracy.
Yeah. Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand was in that school as well. Yes, that I agree with. But if you watch our history shows,
yeah,
there may be a lesson there with how the oligarchs thought they could control Lenin.
Yeah.
And Lenin made them think that they could control him.
Yeah.
And he would work with them or befriended them.
Yeah.
But he was actually working against them. And
Absolutely.
I think when you look at Klaus Schwab, you have to say there are leaders that he absolutely controls.
Yeah.
And I think there are other leaders who definitely will go speak at the WEF. They'll definitely shake his hand. They'll use globalism and the WEF for their advantage.
Yes.
But then they'll turn on him as well. I mean, there are leaders like that. And we've made that point about, you've made that point about China specifically, in that China, they play the globalism up to the hilt.
Absolutely.
Globalism. But when it comes to China, they don't want any of the globalism.
No,
they don't want it anywhere near them. Yeah. So I mean, they play the WEF.
Yeah. Yes, it's for export only. It's the kind of thing that but you're absolutely right. They play it. So of course, Klaus Schwab and his cronies are extremely pleased because they got the president of China, the great new power, and he comes and he talks the talk, and they don't notice that he's not actually walking the walk. He's doing something completely different.
Yeah. Valias, thank you for that super chat. Thank you, Valias, very much. I also think I saw GEC is also moderating as well. Welcome, GEC. Elaine, thank you for that super chat, super sticker. And Rob says, thank you for your kind words about Canada of my birth, Alexander. But I believe we have long since become far too weak, divided, and dependent on war-addicted U.S. Israel to stand for anything truly peaceful.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm sad. As I said, my parents used to travel to Canada quite a lot. For some reason, I've never been. I mean, there was an occasion when I came very close to traveling there, but I never did. But my parents loved Canada, and they would come back and tell me about the extraordinary landscape of the country and its beautiful cities and its amazing people, and they hugely admired the country. So if it's if it's been lost, I hope it can be regained. That's all I can say.
Vicky Rosina, thank you for that super sticker. And Freedom Autopsy Report says Trump is believed to be a direct descendant of Rurik and related to the Plantagenet. Plantagenet. What does that word mean? Plantagenet. King Henry III. Can you tell?
Well, I can't actually, but I mean, they're the royal family of England in the Middle Ages. So they start with King Henry II in the 12th century, and the very last Plantagenet king was Richard III, who is the famous villain in Shakespeare's play, and the man who's widely suspected of murdering the two princes in the tower. So it's an incredibly glamorous family. It's the most important. It's the most important sort of branch of the English royal family, and it's the English royal family during the Middle Ages. And Rurik is the ancestor of the early medieval ancestor, late Dark Ages ancestor of the Russian royal family up to the time of the early 17th century. So all of the princes of Russia, princes of Kiev, of Moscow, and the very first Tsars
up to Michael
Russia,
Romanov.
Up to Michael Romanov, exactly. Okay. Up to Michael Romanov, they were descended from Rurik.
Right.
And importantly to say, there's still many descendants of Rurik still around, including in Russia itself, and so that they form a branch, widely important branches of the aristocracy. But the Romanovs themselves are not descended from him. So it seems that Donald Trump has two great royal stems in his ancestry. I would never have known.
That's fantastic. All right. 01 Lurius, thank you for that super sticker. Freedom Autopsy Report says, how does George Soros benefit from Americans' suicide attempt? How does George Soros benefit?
Money. I think my own personal view about Soros is that there is ideology and it isn't to be discounted, but money is always the driver.
I think it's more money.
I
have to be honest.
Absolutely.
I think the guy, everything he does, if you peel it back, he always does it because he's got some sort of monetary
financial. Absolutely. I mean, that is absolutely my view. I mean, ideology. I mean, there is some real belief in it, but fundamentally, his ideology is always aligned with his financial interests.
Yeah, so if it's about destroying a certain city in the U.S. or a certain sector, it's because he's bet against it. That's why. Yeah,
exactly.
David March says, my friends in the U.S. intel community believe Taiwan has about 20 tactical nukes they acquired from India in the 2000s, strapped to F-15s.
Well, I haven't heard of that. And of course, if that's true, that is a massive game changer. All I would say is, if it is true, and I've no reason, I'm not saying it isn't true, but I'm pretty sure the Chinese know it. And of course, it must intensify, it must create particular ructions and nervousness on the Chinese side as well. And well, we'll see how it works out.
Tristan says, thank you for the great critical thoughts analysis regarding U.S., Russia, Ukraine, war economy versus civil welfare. Neocon neoliberal idealism is equal to the enemy of civil society. Peace.
Absolutely. Now, America is, can I just say about war economy? The United States is designed to be a peaceful country. I mean, that's what the founders imagined. It's not a country which is really suited to having big military industries. And that's why it's morphed in this hideous way with this military industrial complex. The United States wants to become itself it needs to pursue a policy of genuine
I
peace.
think that's a very smart assessment you just made. I'm just thinking about it. I don't think anyone has said that. The United States the founding fathers did design the United States to just stay out of trouble, to be a peaceful, peaceful country.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a very interesting assessment. Very good, Alexander. The Oracle of London, folks. Russell Hall says, what is Putin's net worth? Every article I've read about his secret billions were all smoke and mirrors. If I had to guess, it looks to be around 10 million or so. Oh, I don't know.
I don't know. No, look, I wouldn't. I'm not going to pretend that I have any real idea about this. I did years ago a big article looking at all the claims that have been made about Putin's billions, and I looked at all the various, stories that have circulated: the Italianate palace on the Black Sea, the shares in Gazprom, the shares in Gunvor, all these companies, and in every single case, it's actually possible, which is unusual. Actually, it's actually possible to prove that these stories were untrue. If you actually went in and went into the detail, you could actually prove it. Now, at the same time, I don't want to pretend that Putin is a saint, and my own impression of Putin is that he's very, very focused on power, the exercise of power, running Russia, being president of Russia. He's undoubtedly patriotic. He's concerned about, the Russian people. Maybe, I'm not saying, he's a saint. Maybe he's got, $1 million stashed away here or $1 million stashed away there or something of that kind. I don't have any proof or evidence of that. I don't think anybody has any proof or evidence of this. The only thing I can say absolutely is that all these stories about how he's worth 10 billion, 20 billion, 40 billion, 200 billion, all those kind of things have no reality. That's all I could say about him.
Freedom Autopsy report says Putin could stage a false flag with captured Nazi tanks and blame the invasion of Ukraine on Hitler.
Well, of course, absolutely. Lots of captured Nazi tanks all over Russia. There is one of the best tank museums in the world is in Russia. Place I can't remember the exact location, but you can find amazing examples of captured German tanks there, including the only complete Maus, the Maus being this colossal tank that Hitler designed, which weighs all of 200 tons. And it's there, they can have it. So no doubt, we'll be seeing them in pictures before very long, all the Nazi tanks trundled out of this museum, and they'll all be part of this great set. And then Jen Psaki and the State Department and Admiral Kirby and all of these people will tell us, well, there's the proof. There's the false flag.
Yeah. Hey Man says Putin is threatening the U.S. with world peace.
Yeah.
Not
the US, the neocons, and the military industrial and the military industrial complex that funds them.
Jang says super sticker. Thank you very much, John, for that. Kurt says, I saw Indian news. The Sikh are furious with Trudeau that he hid not solving their problems. Why? Because they own 400 of the trucks in the convoy.
Didn't know that.
That's interesting.
Oh, that's very interesting. Okay, gosh.
Everyone is pissed off with Trudeau, that's for sure. Flying Boar says, if not Trudeau, Canada Deputy PM Chrystia Freeland, even more dangerous and anti-Russian. Yes, she is very dangerous.
Extremely so, yeah.
That is the worry, yeah.
Absolutely, very, very much the worry. And but having said that, I this is one of those rare cases where I'd even take the danger just to get rid of him. I mean, he just upsets me. He's one of the very few people I find it difficult to watch, actually. Yeah. I mean, that's how strong my reaction is when I see him.
Shell Beach says, could all these apparent failures of the U.S. really be successes of the Great Reset, given that downgrading the United States on the global stage is one of the stated goals of the
You
Great
know,
Reset.
you hear this said so often. I don't know that it's true. I wouldn't completely dismiss that possibility. Now, I say that, when some of my friends hear me say that, they said, well, you're retreating into conspiracist thinking. But I say these people are conspiratorially minded, and they're very complicated, and they have extraordinarily complicated minds, and they're quite capable of thinking up something like this. The only thing I would say about that, if this is really what they're doing, then they are actually fools, because the United States is ultimately the guarantor of the international economic and political system upon which these people exist. They would be exactly like the oligarchs in Russia who arranged the destruction of the Tsar. We've just done a program about this, thinking that they would gain power as a result, and instead brought upon themselves the deluge.
Yeah, that program will be premiering tomorrow, by the
Yeah.
way. And it's a good one. Zariel says, Alexander, you need to go to Dresden. Small, but wow.
I haven't been to Dresden. This is, interestingly enough, I don't really know East Germany particularly well at all. I've never been around the former East Germany. I gather Dresden is astonishing. And by the way, it has an enormous musical culture. The Dresden Staatskapelle, the orchestra there, is, in my opinion, probably today the best German orchestra. I think it's better than the Berlin Philharmonic. And it's got tremendous opera and whatever, and of course, art. And you're interested in porcelain, which I am, by the way. Amazing porcelain, whatever. I've never been there. The only part of the former East Germany I've ever visited is East Berlin, which is a pretty extraordinary place, can I just say? Very remarkable.
Raul Pinto says, Wall Street Journal, Saudi Aramco looks to sell 50 billion stake in fresh share listing. Thoughts on why do the Saudis need money?
Good question. You'd have thought that at a time like this, with oil prices rising, they wouldn't need money. Well, the only explanation I can think of is that MBS is once again coming up with his schemes of transforming Saudi Arabia with this, into this techno paradise, and again, he needs money to do it. So he's selling the goose that's laying all the golden eggs.
Yeah, MBS is up to something.
Yeah.
Kevin Shore says, Alex C., your English is so good. How much time and where did you live in the States? Do you have dual U.S. citizenship? No, I don't have dual U.S. citizenship. I lived over 20 years in the U.S. I consider myself as much American as Greek in a way. So I spent most of my life in the United States, East Coast and West Coast, from New York, D.C. to Arizona and California.
Yes,
and everywhere in between.
And everywhere. The part of the United States I know is New York, particularly New York City, which of course is not representative of the United States at all. We were actually going to visit my wife and I had made arrangements to visit New Mexico last year, but we couldn't. We had to call it off because of all the restrictions. But I mean, I loved New York. I haven't been there for a long time.
I love the Southwest of the United States.
Right. Yeah.
Arizona, New Mexico is really, it's really interesting landscape.
Well, I have to say that's the other thing I was going to say. I mean, New York State, there are parts of New York State, I mean, the forests and things, which I thought was just stunning. I mean, America has some of the most amazing landscapes.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Raul says, is there a collapse in Saudi Arabia because of infighting for the throne? What would be the impact? What would be the impact on the US dollar and the West in general?
Well, that's interesting because I mean, obviously, it does sound as if things are going on in Saudi Arabia with this further sale of Aramco. I mean, just after I answered the question, I was wondering also whether perhaps he's having to pay more bills for his Yemen war, which is obviously a massive drain. So who knows what's going on? And I am pretty sure that amongst the princes, there must be a great deal of antagonism towards MBS as well. So it's not impossible that there could be a power struggle. It's not impossible that things are, more fragile than they appear. With Saudi Arabia, it's always difficult to say exactly what's happening. In Saudi Arabia, there's a massive power struggle in Saudi Arabia. If things really get out of control there, then the effect on the world economy will be enormous, because we still need oil, and Saudi Arabia is not as important to the oil market as it used to be, but it is still very important. And of course, the other major concern is that if there's a complete breakdown in Saudi Arabia, this is the point of origin, the country of origin of the international jihadi movement. And you could see all sorts of very, very dangerous forces rise to the surface. So it could have huge impact on the on international affairs, because it might undermine the position of the petrodollar, because the Saudis wouldn't, if there was a crash, they wouldn't be insisting on payment in dollars, for example. That might have an impact on the reserve currency status of the dollar. It could impact on the financial system, because the Saudi and Gulf sovereign wealth funds play such a huge role in it, as so many of these very high net worth individuals that come out in this part of the world. So there could be enormous economic consequences. There could be huge geopolitical consequences. And of course, there could be a real danger of international terrorism and jihadism exploding again on a scale we've never seen. Saudi Arabia sits on multiple fault lines.
Thank you, PEG, for that $19 super sticker. Thank you very much. And thank you, Calliope Yanatos, for that $50 super chat. Thank you very much, Calliope, for that. We really appreciate it. And from Freedom Autopsy Report, Vlad the Great brought Christianity to Russia, and 1,000 years later, Putin restored Christianity to Russia. Yeah. Putin is the second coming of Vlad the Great. Vlad the Great.
Well, perhaps a better comparison than Peter the Great, who, as I said, I think is a rather brutal and violent person. The only thing I'd say about Vlad the Great,
but Peter the Great was a great.
Peter the Great was a visionary, Titanic, and a visionary figure, and an extremely clever man, and extraordinary man. I mean, I'm not denigrating him at all. All I'm saying is that there's a difference in personality. We know less about Vladimir the Great's personality. The only thing I would say was that he did make that famous comment to the Muslims that Russians can't become Muslims because drinking is the joy of the Russians. And I can't quite see Putin saying something like that today.
All right, so Zelensky. Tristan says Zelensky doing what he does best: drama, Greek tragedy. He's an actor. Ukraine on lips of global audience. He's exposing both villain and foe to the audience. I would say, Alexander, but the economy is imploding because of all of this.
Absolutely, yes. I absolutely. And I think that I would also add that he might have been a good actor on television, but in the world of international diplomacy and politics, he's a bad actor. He doesn't come again across as serious. And the Americans are apparently getting increasingly annoyed about him because he's going off script all the time. The Russians aren't impressed by him. I think that I don't think he'll be around for very long. That's my own view anyway.
Yeah, I agree with that. Mark Hewitt says Sunak and Gove may have just lost any chance of becoming PM with their poor comments performance this week.
Yeah, I know. Which would presumably leave open the door to Liz Truss, which I have to say, it seems an even worse.
Her interview on the BBC was a freaking train wreck.
A train wreck, exactly.
What a train wreck.
Exactly. We don't. I mean, that's the other real problem. We have a political desert in London, in Britain. I mean, there just isn't anybody who you have any real confidence in taking over. I still think Sunak is the most likely one. And I think he thinks he's the most likely one, which doesn't mean that he's right, by the way. And I'm afraid it'll be, if he does take over, it'll be exactly like that other viewer said. He will seek a rapprochement with the EU because he comes from that kind of globalist world, that big money world, which will push him in that direction.
Yeah. Sheila Fisher, thank you for your super sticker. Thank you very much for that. And GEC 812 says, recently watched Kings and Generals YT documentary, Ancient Origins of the Kievan Rus. It's amazing groups today reflected in tribes of that time.
Interesting. I haven't seen it, obviously. Once upon a time, long ago, I was quite familiar with this kind of history. I should say to people that I did a history degree, and very unusually, I chose as my special subjects the history of Russia and the history of the United States, because those were the two countries that attracted me. And at one time, I did know quite a lot about the history of Kievan Rus, but it's all a long time now.
Amrit says, U.S. West has for a long time wanted to break Russia, but should remember a series of strikes of Poseidon and Avant-Garde would be enough for Washington Incorporated.
Well, indeed, I read recently somewhere, I think it was in, somebody was quoting a book written by Robert Gates, who was George W. Bush's defense secretary after Rumsfeld stepped down, about how apparently Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney's father, Bush's vice president, and who was also defense secretary at one time, when the Soviet Union broke up, he said that he'd like to see Russia break up too. Apparently, he actually was going around saying things like this. Well, that's the policy, in effect, that neocons have been following. And look where it's brought us.
Yeah. Rob Junot says, what do you, kind gentlemen, think will be the long-term effects of the years-long and completely unjust legal persecution of Assange?
It's this huge topic. I was deeply shocked by the last High Court decision in London. I thought that it was completely wrong at multiple levels. I thought it completely misunderstood the law. And I've spoken about that in programs we've done on the Duran. Now, it looks like he's going to be granted permission to appeal to the Supreme Court, the British Supreme Court. And he's going to be granted permission to appeal. Now, this is a formality. I've no doubt that's going to happen on precisely those points which I thought the High Court had got wrong. And that makes me hopeful, a little hopeful, 5% hopeful, that this is going to be a serious hearing. In which case, if it is a serious hearing, logically, he should win. In which case, hopefully, the case will end. So it's a very small hope. Up to now, things have been going hideously wrong in this case, but it's just possible that perhaps at the level of the Supreme Court, he will win. And I think what I'm hearing is that the reason that this has happened is that the High Court decision, which was so profoundly wrong, has triggered a backlash from amongst a lot of extradition lawyers in Britain, but also from some of the lower court judges who think that the decision is illogical. So let's just keep our fingers crossed and see.
Let's see here from Kurt. This week, I wish I was a trucker sitting behind 30 tons of steel and iron, plowing through snow and ice on my way to the capital to change history.
Yeah.
Well said, Kurt.
Well said. Very well said.
Hey Man says, only took 2 centuries of being called uncivilized for Russia and China to look to each other. No looking back, only forward.
I'm afraid that's right. In fact, I'm not afraid of that. I mean, to be very clear, the fact that Russia and China are on good terms is intrinsically and inherently a good thing. The fact that Russia and China are not just on good terms and friends, but that they're now thinking of becoming allies against the United States is a tragedy for the United States, and one which is completely avoidable and which should never have happened. But that's where we are, and that train is moving forward.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the reality. That's the path that the neocons have brought us to.
Dan Noya says, if we all must drive electric cars, where will the electricity come from? We have currently brownouts just from running our AC. I don't see too many folks building power plants in their backyards. And a second part to that is, by the way, China has monopoly on materials for battery production. Let that sink in. China will be the battery OPEC.
You are so right on all those points. And by the way, I've been looking at some of the economics and logistics of this. And if we were going to go electric or in Britain on the scale that the government wants us to do, we would have to increase electric power generation in Britain by absolutely astonishing amounts. To be straightforward about it, I don't think it can be done. And if it's going to be done, how is it going to be done, and with what technology? We've seen that, windmills don't all operate all the time. Building nuclear power stations takes a very long time. We're going to have to import all these batteries from China. We're going to have to import gas if we're going to keep all these targets. And at the end of the day, it's still, if we're using gas, it's still fossil fuels. So it doesn't really resolve the problem. My own personal view, and I'm going to say this, I have grave misgivings about this electric car thing. And all I will say is this: one of the great pleasures that I have in life is I like driving long distances. I mean, that always surprises people, but just before the pandemic began, I drove from London to Berlin. I know. You cannot do that with electric cars today. It is impossible. If you're all electric cars using the kind of batteries we have today, all right, I drive longer distances than most people do, but it will change fundamentally much of the way in which people live. It will mean that this freedom that people have had to move from one place to another is going to go.
That's the point.
That's the point. Well, of course it is. It's Klaus Schwab's vision, which seems to align so perfectly with Greta's and all the rest. Exactly. Yeah.
How dare you? Okay.
How dare I? Yes, I know.
Gordon, thank you for that super sticker. Anatoly says UK has coal and gas. What chance drilling starts?
Hugely difficult politically. I mean, coal, I would have thought, out of the question for the moment. I mean, I really don't think this is going to happen. I mean, but by the way, reopening coal mines is apparently extremely difficult. And of course, the coal mining communities, well, I mean, they've been broken. So I can't really see how that can be done. Drilling for gas is theoretically a possibility, but of course, the political opposition would be huge. Perhaps that will change, but it will take an awful lot to make it change.
Tristan says, how often do we hear the word peace spoken by the mainstream media?
We don't. But it's not just the media never talks about peace. Where is the peace movement that we used to have in Europe? Where's it gone? Where is the peace movement we used to have in the United States? Where's it gone? It's terrible. We never hear the word peace.
Yeah. Russell Hall says Russia was selling gold. Recently, they've bought.
Oh, okay.
We have to look into exactly.
Yeah, well, we have to look. I mean,
obviously, there's something going on.
Yeah, there's something going on. I mean, I'm going to make a guess that this is probably part of their operations to build up maybe their euros or RMB or something of that kind. It's probably the way the central bank manages, because the central bank, by the way, is responsible for all the reserves, including the reserves, the foreign currency reserves in the Russian sovereign wealth fund. So they're probably doing all kinds of operations. They probably do all kinds of operations all the time of this nature. I would have thought it's a technical thing.
All right. Zariel says nuclear energy is the only option, as sad as it is.
Well, I'm fully willing to accept that. In fact, I actually believe that. But we've let nuclear energy run down disastrously in Britain. In Germany, they're closing down nuclear power stations. I was reading recently that the nuclear power stations in France, many of them are not in a good state. So, restarting all of that is going to take time. We're talking about, with nuclear power, the lead times are very long. Even if, you go in for small nuclear reactors, which of course have not yet been tested properly. I mean, so we're looking at least 20 years to, get back to where we were, 50 years ago.
And Rich says the required battery making equipment and materials is mainly controlled by two nations, China and Japan. Both have complete supply chains for themselves.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
And Amrit also says if the US thinks that diverting gas from Japan to the EU would be good, then see into the fact that Japan is more critical to world semiconductor vehicles, machinery, supply chain magnitudes larger than the EU and the US.
You're absolutely right. And this is a disastrous idea. It's what we call in England robbing Peter to pay Paul. I mean, the idea that, if there's a gas shortage in Europe, you can simply take gas from the Asians, and that's not going to have consequences globally. It's just stupid. It just amazes me that people could even be discussing these kind of possibilities. I mean, obviously, what must the Japanese be feeling when they read all these reports and discussions that are taking place in the United States on this particular topic? That's why, as I said earlier in the program, I'm sure what's happened is that the Federal Reserve, the Commerce Department, the Treasury, the people there who understand these kind of things are telling, the Blinkens and the Sullivans and the Newlands and all those dreadful people, look, what you're talking about is madness. You can't just move around ships, LNG ships, and transfer them from Japan and South Korea or wherever, and think that that's not going to have consequences. There is a global market in energy. If you take energy from one part of the world to make up for a shortage in another, that's going to create a major crisis. Globally, it's going to affect prices, it's going to affect costs, it's going to have geopolitical consequences too, because at that point, people in Tokyo, in Seoul, in Taipei, wherever, are going to be very angry, and they're going to say, why should we lose so that Europe can be protected?
Yeah. Elena Diaz says, why do China sometimes use often the old Soviet flag? Does it have a symbol?
I'm not sure they do, actually. The Chinese flag and the Soviet flag are very similar. They're both red flags because for historic reasons, which I believe go back to the French Revolution. The red flag became not the red. It was actually later than that. But anyway, the red flag in the 19th century became the flag of the international workers' movement. So there you go. So it's the red flag. And then there's the gold star, which I think is part of the Chinese symbol. The Soviet symbol was the hammer and sickle, which is not the Chinese symbol. So they're different.
Yeah. Zariel says, did you guys know that Putin actually attended the World Economic Forum Young Leaders program sessions in his early days? I think that's why he's against them.
Oh, I see. Okay. I didn't know this. I mean, it's an aspect of Putin's biography I didn't know. And I wonder how and when actually that could have happened.
Yeah, why?
I mean, why?
He wasn't really groomed as a leader. Maybe when he was vice president. Maybe.
Who knows? I mean, his career was
he was vice president, or
no, he wasn't vice president.
Under Yeltsin,
he worked in the secretariat of the presidential administration, but before that, he was vice mayor. He was vice mayor of St. Petersburg. So maybe it was then.
How did he go from? What was his position before he was before he became president? What was
Right. He was director of the FSB. And
that was
then
where
he
he
was
was
made
before?
and then he was
Okay.
made prime minister.
Prime Minister. Okay, yeah. There you
Prime
go.
minister.
Maybe
and
when he was
then
prime minister, he
well,
went.
who knows? Well, who knows? I would have thought more plausibly when he was vice mayor of St. Petersburg. But even then, I mean, I've never heard this story, and it's certainly not one, by the way, that people in Russia are much told about.
Yeah.
Mm.
Who knows? Keep your enemies close.
Close.
Yeah. Who knows? Let's see. Virginia sends a super sticker. Thank you very much, Virginia. What it must be like to go to a Klaus Schwab event.
Yeah.
My God.
I mean, I will just make one observation. I mean, things don't always turn out if you take people like that to your school as you expect. I have a Russian friend who is now quite a senior executive in a Russian, in a very big Russian company, and who's involved in the work in the Arctic or wherever. But anyway, he actually studied economics at Cambridge and was exposed to an awful lot of the thinking of Western economic theory, macroeconomics. And then he went to work in Western banks, American, British banks, and that turned him against them. So, I mean, you know, it made him more patriotic and more skeptical. Yeah. So, you know, and that's somebody I actually know.
Hey Man says Trump squandered his opportunity. He needed to get his house in order before taking on China. He was our last chance. These kids today are no match.
Profoundly true about Trump, by the way. And can I just say, his biggest mistake by far is the one that Alex has hammered away at, which was he didn't get on top of the tech companies, of the social media companies.
Yep, that did him in.
Yeah.
And putting John Bolton.
And putting Bolton. I mean, that was just. I mean, one wonders exactly what happened there. I mean, there's clearly a story to be told there, but that was a crass mistake. But in terms of Trump's political survival, it was what you said. He didn't get on top of social media, so he let his opponents control the narrative around him.
For a marketing guy,
yeah.
How did he miss it?
No, I know.
Yeah. Rich says an Anglo reporter by the name of Tom Rogan said the Italian industry leadership meeting, President Putin is a sign of Italy's greed. A better word for greed would have been Italian pragmatism and experience.
Absolutely. Tom Rogan, I believe, writes also for Washington Examiner, by the way. And he's a person with all the usual British complexes about Russia. And he wants the United States to be as anti-Russian as possible because, well, that fits into the kind of British thinking. And, you know, I do read him from time to time, and I find him a rather disturbing person. And I think his comments about the Italian business people were just astonishing. What are business people supposed to do? What are business people supposed to be about? They're supposed to be about business. America understood this very well. What was it Calvin Coolidge once said? The business of America is business. You should never criticize business people for seeking business opportunities. That is crass. That is utterly stupid. And again, it shows the extent to which ideological obsessions have now pushed to one side the kind of practical, pragmatic ones, which are the ones upon which the world is based. Now, obviously, I would say that if Putin were indeed Adolf Hitler, then it would be different. But as we know that he's not, that kind of comment by Tom Rogan is totally crass.
Yep. Go woke, go broke. Sanjeva says every Russian has had at least some of their grandparents killed or deeply affected by the war. All Russians, whether or not they like Putin, has a real connection to this past. Hence their anxiety about NATO. West simply doesn't get it. Thank you very much, Sanjeva, for that.
Excellent comment and profoundly right. You only have you go to Russia, you see exactly how true that point is. Yep. It's a profoundly correct point.
Absolutely. Sparky says Soros was raised a globalist ideologue. He and his parents only spoke Esperanto in their household.
Absolutely, I understand that. I still think, though, that Alex's point, money is the ultimate driver, is the real one. I mean, I'm not denying that ideology is a part of his makeup, but with Soros, always the ideology aligns with extreme self-interest.
Rich says China is solidly progressing in memory chip mass production with companies like Yangtze Memory,
Yeah.
NAND Flash Memory, and CXMT DRAM Memory.
Yeah,
U.S.
yeah.
propaganda would make you think otherwise.
Yes, I'm not a technical person in that kind of way, so I'm not going to discuss but again, the idea that some people in the US seem to have, that the Chinese certainly and the Russians also can't develop their own technologies is completely misguided. It's wrong. Now, the United States did once have a technological lead over these countries, but it was a United States with a different economic structure from the highly oligarchical structure it has today. The United States wants to regain that lead. It needs to do something about its economic system. In other words, we come back, America first.
Yeah. Elena Diaz says Erdogan in Ukraine. Any news besides more drones?
Well, I mean, all sorts of economic links. The Russians are very, very angry. He's tried to pacify them by inviting Putin to come to Turkey, and he's even set himself up as a mediator, not realizing, I think, that that's annoyed the Russians even more. So it's classic Erdogan. He, on the one hand, hopes that he can be close to the Russians, but at the same time, he wants to assert his independence of them, and he gangs up with the Ukrainians. And the big question is, when will the day come when the Russians finally say enough? Because sooner or later, it's going to happen. And I think this thing with Ukraine and Erdogan is a huge mistake.
Yeah. Kurt says each country should create a people's shadow government. Might not have formal legislative power, but if people start to follow it, it doesn't matter.
I think I understand what you mean, which is to say that, we, with the our institutions under elite capture, we have to, in effect, create our own institutions, our own parallel structures. Well, there may be some place in that, but the thing to do is to organize to recapture our institutions, and especially in the United States, where, as I said, let's never forget the Constitution is still there with all its safeguards and all its opportunities created by the founders. I'm not being sentimental. I read the Constitution carefully. I read it with the eye of somebody who worked in a very different system in Britain. I'm always impressed at how prescient it is and how wise it is. I mean, the founders were a pretty remarkable group of people. And what the US needs to do, what the public of the US needs to do, is to go back and use all of that and use it against the people who have gained control in the way that they have done.
Yeah. Algorithm says, good morning. Thank you, Algorithm. Good morning to you. And Frederick B says, what do you guys think of the future of Georgia after the Ukraine debacle ends? Normalize relations with Russia.
This is, again, something that Georgia must one day do. The two countries have a very long history, mostly, by the way, a good history. I mean, there have been difficult times, but they have a long history. They have shared religion. I mean, Georgia is an Orthodox country, like Russia is, Russians have very, very warm feelings about Georgia. If you go to Russia, Georgian restaurants and things like that are extremely common, and Russians like Georgian wine and all of this. So, make this big country that is well disposed to you, with which you have a long history, your friend. Don't make it an enemy. I think eventually that will happen. It will take a while. There's a lot to do to sort out. And of course, if Ukraine isn't joining NATO, well, Georgia isn't either. So put that illusion to one side and play your cards well as an independent country and make the most of your opportunities.
Yeah. A lot of Georgians live in Russia. A lot of Georgians
A lot of
live in
Georgians.
Russia. A lot of Russians go to Georgia for holiday as well.
Holidays, absolutely.
And millions of Ukrainians migrated to Russia.
Absolutely.
After the coup in 2014.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. And again, Georgians, and very, very many of them in Moscow. I mean, there's a huge Georgian diaspora there.
It'll sort itself out.
I will eventually.
People allow it to sort itself out.
Yeah, exactly.
Ryan says, just as Barnes said in regards to the U.S. judicial system, judges, judicial branches don't interpret the law anymore to a large degree. It's been overtaken by activist hacks funded by the left and Soros.
I never imagined at the extent to which that is true. I could never have believed that the United States, with this tremendous juridical tradition, would find itself in this place. And, we need to do another program with Barnes. We haven't done one for a while. And we need to look at those issues again. And you can explain to us exactly how it's happened. But fundamentally, you are right. The other thing that the American people must do is that they must regain control of their legal system.
Yeah. Sparky says, I agree. Soros is about money and colored ideology.
No.
Yes, very true. And Kurt Fram says, Alexander, you read my comment about the shadow government exactly right, and I hope it will not be necessary. Thank you, Kurt, for that. An excellent comment as well. And let's see. Sparky says, Pompeo fooled Trump and may still have him fooled.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to this. I think Trump was impressed by Pompeo when he was a representative, because he was pretty outspoken. He was very anti-Chinese and all those kind of things. And Trump likes people who appear to be strong and tough and whatever. But I think he found Pompeo very difficult to control. And when he made him Secretary of State, well, I think Pompeo and Bolton basically came together. Apparently they didn't like each other, but they still came together in a kind of a way. And they took the foreign policy of the United States in all kinds of directions, which I think Trump didn't want to go down.
Yeah. Raphael says, I strongly believe that the USA simply spooked because they did not envision that they could ever be in someone's crosshairs for real and so soon.
Well, indeed. Now, again, when we talk about that, we must understand that certainly the Russians have no interest in taking on the United States. I mean, I just want to make an observation. Fiona Hill, this British, and it's important always to stress that she's British, this British academic, so-called academic, who floats around Washington, gets on the National Security Council, writes for foreign policy and foreign affairs and all these magazines that exist in America, and is treated as a Russia expert. I mean, she gets things about Russia continuously wrong. And one of the things she got wrong, and she's profoundly wrong about, she said that the Russians want to push the United States completely out of Europe. I don't think that's right at all. The Russians do not want the United States to completely quit Europe. They do not want a situation where other countries in Europe, because they're no longer allied to the United States, start getting dangerous ideas, like developing their own nuclear weapons, for example, and start making all kinds of defense arrangements. The Russians would prefer a deal with the United States to stabilize the situation in Europe and bring all these very dangerous people who exist there in Britain, in all sorts of other places, under control so that there can be peace in Europe. The Russians would prefer a partnership with the Americans to do that. That has been Russian foreign policy, to my mind, certainly since the Soviet Union ended. Now, I'm not saying this off the top of my head. I follow what Russians say, what actual Russians say. And you can see that no Russian official has ever once said that they want to see the United States quit Europe. And if you go and look at the kind of commentaries that real Russians come up with, you will see that they make exactly the kind of points that I've made.
All right. Ralph Peterson says, thanks for sharing knowledge. Thank you very much, Ralph, for that. And Kurt says, if you press people too hard on energy, they will burn whatever they can.
Yeah.
Whatever they can find to cook and get warm and create a truly dirty air disaster. That's very true.
That's very, very true.
Very,
Absolutely
very,
true.
Very good true. Point. Raphael says, I strongly believe that, oh no, I read that. Let's see. I lost my place, Alexander. Here we are. Shadowfire says, what do you both think of peak oil, peak energy being one of the background factors driving current geopolitical activity?
There was all that peak oil thing a couple of 20 years ago, and then shale came, and then it all seemed to fade. Maybe it will come back. Struggle over energy and energy supplies is incredibly important and should never be discounted. And obviously, it plays a big role in Middle Eastern politics. It certainly plays a role in Russian politics and geopolitics. I mean, one of the big issues, one of the reasons why things went so badly wrong between Russia and the West was that when Putin came along, he started to take steps to bring Russian energy suppliers, Gazprom, Rosneft, all the big oil companies in Russia under Russian control, and wasn't going to allow especially European companies to come in and extract oil and gas in Russia by themselves, as if, Russia was Nigeria or someplace like that. So, I mean, this plays a very, very big role in all of this. I don't think it's the exclusive and only one. However, I think if you're talking about people like Klaus Schwab, I think he does see Russia as the kind of country which is important for energy, and he needs reliable energy supplies to be able to construct his vision. I think that plays a role with him. But with some of the others, with some of the neocons, I think there is a kind of ideological vision which goes beyond just energy. So we mustn't just think it's only about energy, though energy does play a big role in it. As for peak oil, well, I don't know whether we might be getting back soon to that kind of debate. We'll just have to see. I mean, as I said, it's faded. And of course, we talk about green things now. I think if green things don't work, and if we find that we're short of fossil fuels, and we need fossil fuels, well, maybe we'll start to hear more of that again.
Hunger says, it's a CIA psyop when Russian Antifa go volunteer for the Azov battalion. Fascism is just the byword for enemies of the global American empire.
So true.
Well said. Let's see here. Where am I? Radovid says, Dresden has a very rich history, amazing place. If you pass by, I offer myself as your personal guide. I was told that I know Dresden better than the locals. The beer is also on me.
Then we will definitely get in touch with you. I mean, absolutely. And I by the way, I've had Saxon beer, and I believe it's the beer that's actually served. Beer from Dresden is the beer that's served in the Chancellery in Berlin. And again, a tradition which goes back to Bismarck's day. So I've heard. And apparently Putin has a taste for it as well. And Merkel used to send him, a case of it every so often. But anyway, I would love to go to Dresden. I mean, it's obviously a city I would love to see.
Raphael says, help me understand this. A week before, you were standing in front of a bridge that has collapsed with everybody on top of it. And now you want wars. Okay. That's a good point.
That's a very good point.
That's a very good point. I don't think Biden quite understands much of anything that's going on around him, though.
No.
That's for sure. Let's see. Adatoli says, Europe will need more energy soon, but refuse to burn fuels. Rosatom must be rubbing their hands while grinning, maniacally waiting for the rapprochement in the wings.
You may be right. Actually, Anatoly, one of the most mysterious comments in a readout that I've ever seen was in a recent readout of a conversation between Putin and Macron, in which they talked about, a cooperation in nuclear energy. This is all in the middle of all the discussions about Ukraine and security guarantees and all that. And suddenly, out of nowhere, there's this, one short little sentence about, cooperating in nuclear energy. What was all that about? Nobody has come up with a clear explanation to me of what that means.
Rich says Italy has relations with more nations around the world probably than any Western nation. Italy was the first G7 to have diplomatic ties with North Korea.
Italy is one of these countries which, because it operates under the radar, is able to establish these kind of linkages. And by the way, Italy has some very, very good diplomats. It's not to be underestimated as a diplomatic force. Of course, what it needs to start doing is to translating all these contacts and all this knowledge that it has into an active foreign policy for peace. And it has all the potential to do it. And it never does, because the political system in Italy is so profoundly dysfunctional. And by the way, Alex, we should do a program about this farce of a presidential election that has just taken place in Italy, which all Italians, I understand, are disgusted by, and which has apparently weakened the current government there, and put Mario Draghi's position, in considerable jeopardy. Seems the only thing that's holding this government together now is fear of an election, which the brothers of Italy would win.
Yep. Yeah, we should do a program on Italy soon. Yeah. Kurt Fram says the politicians came cheap. We could handle them. Sam Ace Rothstein from the movie Casino.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great movie, by the way.
Brilliant movie.
Yes. Thank you very much, Kurt, for that. And Heyman says when Ali got old, the grifters encouraged him to make them more money. His real friends begged him to retire before irreparable damage was done. Well said.
Well said. Very true.
Very true. Hey, man.
Yeah.
And
the only thing I would say is that, of course, I mean, I remember Ali in his heyday, the time of the Rumble in the Jungle and all that. And all I will say is that, I mean, he was a great man. Joe, I can't remember any time in his life when I could say the same about him.
In this corner, fighting out of Scranton, Sleepy Joe Biden taking on Corn Pop. Let's see. Stan Littman says expand Hungary with Galatia, ? What about Kurdistan? Both relate to tribal Y genetics, R1A UK France, R1B Germany Russia, and J2A Minoan.
I'm not up to
I
this
don't quite
kind
get
of thing.
that.
I mean, no, I understand. I mean, these are people who go and look at all the genetic makeups of particular ethnicities, and I think the one I'm most familiar one is about the Slavs, which shows that Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Poles, interestingly, apparently have a lot of genetic material in common, suggesting that they are the actual Slav core. Well, I'm not really somebody who's able to comment about those sort of things in detail. I mean, I think that one shouldn't push this too far nowadays, to be straightforward about it. I think the idea of Hungary taking over Galicia, in other words, Western Ukraine, I can't imagine that Orban, in his worst nightmares, could imagine a worse outcome for Hungary than for poor Hungary to have to deal with those people.
Yeah. I don't think many people want to deal with it. Yeah.
No.
Dan Noya says red herrings and straw dogs. Klaus, Soros, plus corrupt hacks et al. Are still fighting World War II using the British model of triangulation, i.e. the US versus Russia, whilst using China to come in through the back door.
I completely agree. I mean, I think the thing to understand, I mean, we use the word geopolitics because it's the word one has to use now. I mean, international relations has been twisted into an academic subject, which means something completely different from what it used to mean. But we must never forget that geopolitics is something that the British basically invented in the late 19th and early 20th century. And so much of the ideas about geopolitics originates from British ideas, which were imperialist ideas. Playing off countries against each other, trying to control regions and use particular places as pivots and all kinds of things of this kind. And we do need to get past this kind of thinking if we're going to secure peace.
From Freedom Autopsy Reports, Cloward Pivotism. We've had that strategy sent to us before.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
Like a sociology strategy. But I'm not too familiar with it. Are you familiar with it, Alexander?
Not really. And not familiar enough to really discuss it.
Yeah. We've had that before. It's like I don't know. My mind's not working too well today. Let's see. Anatoly says, any people's government will be branded a mafia by the official regimes and will be attacked. Even fitness groups that train young men are under constant observation. Conflict will be inevitable.
Well, that is so absolutely true. Look at the abuse of the word populist. It's the worst insult now for a politician to be called populist, which all it means is ultimately, that they're popular and that they're interested in people.
Being popular was good.
A democratic politician. Democratic politicians are supposed to be both interested in popularity with the people and indeed being close to the people, and yet that's now a bad word apparently. And it's absolutely right.
Being popular is bad. Being masculine is bad.
Absolutely. Organizing, organizing politically, you are exactly subject to the kind of dangers that you've just mentioned. It is absolutely bizarre. It's beyond extraordinary.
Being cultural is bad. Loving culture is bad.
Exactly. Well, quite, yes.
Jeez, what have we come to?
Well, I know, indeed, quite so.
Let's see. Raul Pinto says, breaking, Reuters, Russia, China agree 30-year gas deal via new pipeline to settle in euros.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, absolutely. And that's big. That's very big news. Very, very big news.
Raphael says, in the Security Council meeting, Russia stood up and said, we are not afraid of you. Why am I the only one who is saying this is new? This is big.
It is big and it is new. And Russia got a lot of support on the Security Council.
Sparky
By the way, the ambassador, Vasily Nebenzia, is a very tough character, what we call a bit of a bruiser. But I thought he actually handled that Security Council decision extremely skillfully. Yeah.
I think he's very good. Yeah. Gleska News, £50 super chat. Thank you, Gleska, for that great channel. Hi, guys. What a month. Snow in Greece and the imminent invasion scenario. Just a little to say thank you for all your work in helping diffuse tensions between we and Russia. Keep up the great work.
Thank you very much.
Definitely check out the channel, everybody. Subscribe to them. Very cool. Let's see. Sparky says, Hillary's uranium for Russia nuclear power. That Hillary Clinton.
Oh, dear. Yeah.
She just doesn't seem to go away, does she?
No.
Let's see. Let me scoot over, Alexander, and see what's happening on locals as well. Pompeo is equal to a deep stater. That's what Leafybug says.
True.
Very true. And,
very true.
Let's see. Mizzoni says Russia, China agree to 30-year gas deal, new pipeline to settle in Europe. Maxime says, thank you for your brilliant work and a great hello to the community. Hello, Maxime. Great to see you on here. As an DGC says, as an outsider, Trump was alone. He had to take his team for all the government spots from his enemies.
That he didn't know who his true friends were. And I agree. He was very isolated within the political class. But there were people there that he could have found who he could have put in good positions and could have helped him. But of course, we have to always come back to that point, which Alex comes back to, and it's absolutely right. He depended heavily on Michael Flynn. When Michael Flynn was taken out, he was to a great extent lost. And he never really regained his footing afterwards.
Yeah, Flynn was his guy. Yeah. he was his guide. I don't even want to say his guy. That was his guide. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Zariel says he was groomed at the same time as Merkel, I guess referring to Putin and
Interesting.
the young group, the young group leaders or whatever it's called,
Yeah,
YGL.
well, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's something. It's an
It would
aspect.
be interesting if he
It
went
would be
with
interesting.
Merkel real quick, wouldn't it? If like they
It'd be
went
very
together.
interesting. It'd be very interesting. Yeah, it might explain why they were. By the way, a lot of Russians, lots and lots of Russians. We've spoken in past programs about how many Russians find that Putin's friendship, if one can call it that, with Erdogan, they find it baffling. And are very critical of it. But a lot of Russians, including apparently very senior Russians, feel that Putin was far too tolerant of Angela Merkel, and that she went along with him. He went along with her far more than he should have done.
Well, Putin has a soft spot for Germany. I mean,
absolutely.
we all know his history.
He loves
speaks
Germany.
It fluently. Yeah,
absolutely. He loves Germany. Many Russians do, by the way. He's not unusual in that, but he perhaps took it to extremes.
Yeah. Veverito says, I would be interested to know what about Nigel Farage. He's a brilliant rhetorician, regularly verbally trashes the EU Parliament, and he is a true patriot. I would be very happy if he could get an important position in the UK again.
Well, he's coming back into British politics. And when he does, believe me, that will be as big an event as Boris leaving.
Yeah, I agree with that. Kent Orban just signed a treaty with Russia that stipulates Hungary will never allow Ukraine to enter NATO. Given the veto structure of NATO, wouldn't that put paid to the entire matter?
I think that is asking an awful lot of the leader of what is still a small country. And bear in mind, Hungary is potentially exposed to many pressures. I mean, they've got many economic levers that they can press to squeeze Hungary, and they could also they're always working to find ways to push Hungary off the European Council, to suspend its voting rights. So if, for example, Orban were to go out of his way and take a step like that, I mean, there might be an attempt to suspend his voting rights in the European Council. He's up to now relied on the support of the Poles to prevent that happening. But if you were to take a step like that, that would enrage the Poles. And, well, who knows what would happen? He might find other friends, the Croats, the Bulgarians, who knows? But they are small countries too. So we mustn't ask more of a leader like Orban than he can realistically deliver. His skill has been to preserve Hungary's independence and its freedom to maneuver and its ability to work with the Russians and to talk to the Russians and to say true things like what he said in Moscow about our sanctions have been a complete failure. If we do more of them, there'll be an even bigger failure. It's his ability to do that that is valuable. And we shouldn't ask more of him than he can deliver, which might make it impossible for him to continue, in which case we lose that quality, that thing that he's already providing. The country that can do the thing that you just said, that could make that treaty with Russia, is France
or
Germany.
Yeah. Let's see here. Alan Watson also was asking about Farage.
Yeah.
So Farage returning would be massive.
That'd be huge, massive. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's hope he does. From Dr. Bill says, during President Putin's New Year's Q&A marathons 3 or 4 years ago, someone asked why there wasn't any move towards electric cars. His answer was, quote, "Do you know that electric cars run on coal?"
True enough.
Very good.
He's very sharp. Putin is very sharp, and the way he's able to keep going through these marathons and keep fresh and active right to the end is astonishing, actually.
Yeah. Leafy Bug says, Cloward Piven, isn't that the incentivizing of single-parent households? I don't know, but I'm going to look it up. I'm curious now. Maxime says, doesn't the world lack a kind of world government that can limit the arbitrariness of big global economic powers?
I think the best way to deal with powerful economic powers is to strengthen states, because states are potentially, at least, democratically accountable. The danger with trying to create a global government is that it's very difficult to keep a global government democratically accountable, because we're all dispersed, we're all in our different countries, we don't have that ability, if you like, to vote in that kind of a way. And of course, if you have a global government, it seems to be much more likely that you will see elite capture, and that instead of being the entity that keeps these global economic powers in check, it will fall under their control, and it will operate on their behalf instead.
Yeah. Degar says good is evil and evil is good. This is where we are in society right now.
Absolutely.
Well said.
Of course, that's entirely true. In fact, I'll go even further, of course, which is that you get into a situation where some people increasingly are denying that there are such things as good and evil.
That is true. Leafy Bug says, I hear that in Sweden, cashless transactions are even more common than in other developed countries where they are already extremely common. People need to start paying in cash again. I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that as well.
Almost impossible to do in London at the moment, by the way. There are it's become, this is the pandemic.
Cash is gone.
Yeah,
huh?
yeah. Well, I think it's maybe starting to trickle back. But you go into lots of shops. My bread shop, basically where I buy bread, for example, they won't take cash.
Because of
because
germs.
You'll get
they're afraid of the germs, or
you get infected by.
Really?
They're on the bank. No, seriously, they're on the banknotes. This is what
oh
you
my god!
You hear a lot of people. You heard a lot of people talk like this.
Oh
So
my god!
You won't take banknotes, exactly. So you've got to pay for everything with cards now.
Leafy Bug says it would only take a relatively small proportion of consumers stubbornly paying in cash to stop the transition to the cashless economy.
Oh, absolutely, of course. It's again a good example of something which we're being pushed into, and which I suspect there'll be a great deal of resistance to.
Yeah, I like cash.
Paying
in cash. Let's see. Rich says Italy was probably the country from where the concept of indivisible security between different states took off in the Middle Ages.
Oh, really?
Venice, Genoa, Firenze, etc.
Interesting. Again, that's a very interesting comment, actually.
Very insightful. Thank you for that, Amrit. Let's see. Luke says, let's liberate Switzerland from those nationalists. And there's a little smiley emoji. Thank you very much for that, Luke Duke. And Second Class Citizen says, Greece being drawn closer to the U.S. and Israel. Will this benefit Greeks, or are they being used as patsies?
Well, to some extent. I think yes. Our political class in Greece, our Prime Minister, for example, Mitsotakis, are deeply pro-American. I think to an excessive degree, actually. When I say excessive degree, I don't mean that Greece should distance itself from the US. But we are deeply integrated into the Euro-Atlantic structures, into friendship with part of the EU, part of the US. I think one thing I would say, and I think in defense of the political class in Greece, it's not a policy I agree with, by the way, but with someone like Erdogan at your door, you need your allies. And I think that makes Greece a little nervous. And, they look at Erdogan, they look at Turkey, they say to themselves, who's going to look after us? So for that reason, we have to be close to the Americans. We have to be close to the Israelis and those sort of people.
Why should Greece worry? It's a NATO country.
Yeah.
Why should Turkey worry? It's a NATO
country.
I
said I don't agree with.
You see the craziness of it?
I don't.
Turkey
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I know. I'm not quite. I don't agree. I don't agree with the policy, but I have heard people talk like this.
What's the use of NATO to Greece, and what's the use of NATO to Turkey if they're both in NATO?
Well,
and they're enemies, supposedly. They're at each other's throats. I don't understand. What's the point?
No, I take your point, Alex, and you're absolutely right.
But Greece spends a lot of money.
Yes.
Actually, Greece is one of the countries that surpasses I believe it's 3%.
Absolutely.
Well, 6 or 8%.
Yeah. What I will say is this: relationship with Israel and the United States has its problems, but it's not the great problem for Greece. Membership of the Eurozone is the great problem for Greece.
That did Greece in a big way.
In
Going into the euro, like the currency that demolished Greece.
Yeah.
Hey Man says, send the Rat Pack on a one-way to Moscow and beg Putin to stand down in regards to China.
Well,
the Rat Pack would like Moscow.
they will absolutely, yeah.
Kurt Fromm says, the government of the country who gave us the man who started World War II now gives us the first EU jab mandate. Have they again gone insane? Question mark.
It's very typical of what you would
Are they
expect.
enforcing it? I don't know. Are they enforcing
No.
the compulsory?
I
jabs?
don't think that. I don't think they'll be able to. I think there'll be so much opposition. You know, people always have this idea that, you know, they're very orderly people, very law-abiding. It's true, but there's always been an anarchic side, and I think that's going to start, you know, feeding into a sort of rebellious streak that will probably grow and intensify over the next few weeks and months.
Yeah. Sparky says, having many strong and differing independent countries around the world acts as a buffer and baffles tyranny.
I agree. That's my view too. I mean, strong independent countries, preferably democratic countries, as I said, with governments that are accountable to the people. That's my own personal conception of a stable world order.
Degar says, do you know anything about the East Med pipeline from Israel running through Cyprus?
I mean, lots of this about Alex. Perhaps this is your part of the world. I mean, there's been talk about it.
If it ever operates at this point. I mean, we've been hearing about it for how long now, Alexander? I mean,
well, certainly
years.
longer. Certainly longer.
Gosh.
I was going to say. I mean, 15 years exactly. I mean, one would like to think it's going to happen, but it never quite seems to for some reason.
And I don't think it's going to be as huge as they're pumping it up to be.
No,
like it's going to displace Russian energy. That's ridiculous.
Ridiculous. I agree.
Yeah,
I agree.
And I don't think the people of Cyprus, for example, are going to. I mean, a lot of Cypriots think that this East Med is going to make them millionaires overnight. I don't think the people of Cyprus are going to see 1 cent of that money.
Yes,
not 1 cent of it. So, you know, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
The man says, Alexander, where is all of this heading? Where is the West going to be in 15 years from now?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew. I would like to think. What I would like to think is that we're going through a particularly hideous spasm at the moment, and that after this, we're at the point with where this has been taken to its extreme. That with this failure of the Biden administration that we're seeing, there's going to be a pendulum swing back, and that the fundamental rationality, especially in the United States, will reassert itself. The Constitution will start to work again. And what others have said on the program, Heyman was saying at the earlier in the program, that the United States, its enormous latent strengths will come back into play and revive. And we will see a United States closer to the kind of United States that I remember as an active and strong member of an international system which is balanced and much fairer and much more peaceful than the one we have today. That's the optimistic view. The other pessimistic view is that we will see instead, especially in Europe, but also in the United States, these projects pushed to the point of utter destruction. In which case, I'm afraid some kind of systems collapse, certainly in Europe and possibly the United States, become possibilities. And then we could see events take shape like we saw in Russia in the 1990s. And that would be very, very bad.
All right. G. Jetta says, now that the COOF mandates and restrictions are being dropped, do you think the focus needs to switch to accountability?
Yes. In a word, I'm not going to say more. But
will the focus switch to
accountability? Will the focus? Well, it should. Will it? No. It should, but it won't.
Leafy Bug says political leaders lying to their constituencies is nothing new, but today's leaders in the West lie despite the truth being in plain, direct sight of their constituencies. What a great comment.
That is an absolutely true comment. I mean, people have told lies since the beginning of time, and in politics, of course, they have, but not in the way that they do today. And it's exactly as you say.
In plain sight. That's a great comment to end the stream, Alexander. We've gotten through a ton of topics and questions and all kinds of
it's fantastic discussion. And I have to say, some of my friends who've been following these programs, I mean, they comment the same way as I do, that the quality of our discussions on our live streams is phenomenal. I mean, I hardly know anywhere else where you get anything of this caliber. So thank you, all of you, for your contributions.
Final comments, Alexander, and we'll sign off for the weekend.
Well, we started with the 3 emperors without clothes. And I mean, you know, I do so hope that we see the back of all 3. The only problem is that in Britain, I can't really who comes next. In Canada, I don't know. I can't help but think that if we're going to see a revival, a change in the West, it's going to come in America. It's the only place. It's the only place that retains intellectual and moral vitality. And you know, we'll see what does come in the United States. But if it doesn't, well, we see these forces that are gathering in Beijing now, Chinese, Russians, and things like that. I think, to come back to that earlier question that we were asked, you know, what would happen? The real danger, I think, is, yes, I mean, we would have systems collapse, but we could also become a backwater. You know, the West becoming a backwater, it's a real possibility. And I would not want to see that at all. I speak as a Western person. Well, I am a part of the West. So we do need to get our act together.
Yeah. Well, during Russia's one of Russia's darkest times in the late 90s, Putin came up. No one expected that. So
no.
You never know. Leadership pops up in the
absolutely
in the strangest of times.
You know, absolutely. You know, I follow Russian politics very close. I did in those days. And when Putin was appointed prime minister by Yeltsin, I said, "Who's this? I've never heard of this man. I mean, he's a complete zero, a non-entity. I thought he'd be around for a couple of weeks, and then we get someone else." I never imagined that in 22 years' time, he'd be dominating 23 years' time, he'd be dominating world affairs to the extent that he is today. So there you go, and more likely, as I said, in the United States than anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, all right. We will end it there, Alexander. Thank you to everyone who joined us on Locals. Great questions. Great chat going on Locals. Thank you to everyone that sent us their super chats and all the comments and questions in the live stream. To our moderators, Valies, Reckless Abandon, Alan Watson, Zarael, GEC, and those are our moderators for this live stream. Thank you very much for keeping the stream moving along and for all your help. Let's head into Saturday.
Indeed,
let's call it a week. What a week.
What a week.
My God.
What a week.
All right. Yeah. All right. Go Truckers. Let's leave it on that note. Go Truckers.
Go Truckers. Go Truckers.
Take care, everybody.
Right.